I would say let's go ahead and call this meeting to order at 1:02. So glad to have everybody on. Um, I think probably first order of business, Ms. Sutcliffe, roll call.
Good afternoon, Mr. Co-Chair and members of the board. This will be the roll call for the work session this afternoon. Ms. Atkinson,
Here.
Ms. Chatterton,
Here.
Mr. Christensen,
Here.
Ms. Crumpton,
Present.
Ms. Downham,
Here.
Mr. Kinsky,
Here.
Mr. Lance,
Here.
Ms. Legursky,
Here.
Mr. Nelson,
Here.
Mr. Pivik.
Here.
Dr. Schaefer is excused, Mr. Smith,
Here.
and Ms. Worthen. Looks like
She's
Okay.
here. We just didn't hear her.
I do see her as well, so I will mark her as present. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. You do have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think with that, really this meeting was more around or this work session was more around kind of what's our alignment, what's our methodology. I know Ms. Fitzgerald had sent out kind of a high level agenda for this portion of the meeting, but Mr. Drell, I don't know if there's anything you want to cover or where you want to start from first.
Mr. Co-Chair, I think we would be ready to do the pledge if it's okay with everybody here to do the Pledge of Allegiance first, if that's all right with everybody.
Let's go ahead with that. I bypassed that part because I didn't see it on the agenda. So
No
my
worries.
apologies.
No worries. I'll go ahead and get us started and then mute us if everyone could join in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Fantastic. Good catch, Mr. Drill.
Glad to help. Glad to help. Yeah. So, Derek, any remarks before we get rolling?
I think really only main comment I'd like to make to the board and the staff, thinking back to the fact it's only May 19th, and there's been a good amount of ground covered by everybody on this call, both on the panel and our staff that are participating by listening. There's a lot of work that's been rolling since we came out of legislative session and we knew where we fell. So just want to acknowledge that hard work and that effort that's being made and that we're continuing to do it. Sometimes it's just hard to remember that it hasn't been that much time that we've been covering and trying to get this work done. So just wanted to say thank you to all of those efforts. So from there, I really view today as kind of an extension of that board meeting that we had in February of our work session, really working towards where do we want to go? Where do we want to take the business council and what's that strategic direction that we can use to continue into the future, and really focus on that and truthfully shift our board's focus a little bit more away from the day to day and more into how do we really help guide not just the organization, but the state of Wyoming into the future. So with that, those are kind of my only opening notes. I think I'll hand that over to you to start in through our presentation for the work session and just jump in with color commentary as we go.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair and members of the board and members of the public. Just to remind everyone that this is a work session. We will not be taking any action or handling any business of the board. That will occur tomorrow, beginning bright and early at about 8 a.m. It will be virtual as we are today. Due to some inclement weather that is bringing much needed moisture to areas of the state. And so I appreciate everyone's flexibility and willingness to work around and be safe as we can, and make sure that our team and board members are safe and members of the public who might be traveling to these meetings. As Derek mentioned, we really want to continue to work on some of the bigger picture elements that the board really needs to wrestle with and the state itself needs to wrestle with. And I think that that's a really key element. I will, if you'll indulge me just a second, I want to talk a little bit about a meeting that Heather Tupper, who leads our regional team, and I were at last Friday morning with directors of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. So these are all chair people of the county commissioners throughout the state. And we had quite a number of them there. I believe there were almost 20 of the 23 counties represented that morning. And we got a chance to hear some of the things that they were talking about and things that were important to them on the ground within the counties. And it was really interesting. One of the county commissioners was talking a little bit about this idea of sense of us. Who are we and what do we want? And I thought it was really refreshing to hear that because a lot of times we really dive into the tactics. We debate whether this say, wait a second, who are we? What do we want? And then maybe how do we get there? Role we play in defining what Wyoming wants and defining what we as a board and as a team can do to affect those changes. And so today is going to be a lot of thinking about big things, but also thinking about personal things and thinking about why these things matter to us as at the business council and what I work to change every day and what we work on and how it is personal to me as someone who grew up in Rawlins, Wyoming, the son of a coal miner. I got to see a lot of the beauty of Wyoming in terms of its nature, the economic opportunity in Wyoming, but also got to see the opposite side of that. When things bust pretty hard. And so with all of that, I really feel fortunate to be in a position where might be able to affect some change on the economy, the long-term economy of Wyoming. And I think all of us have a similar story. And we're going to dive into some of that today because we really feel strongly that if we have a personal connection and we have a match between the mission of our organization and the purpose that we all bring, that we're going to be able to do this really hard work. It is not a series of just mechanical tactics that we can go through and lead us to success. It's really going to take the heart and soul of the people here to make that happen. And so as a result of that, I think we're gonna get a lot out of today, and we're super hopeful. So board members, I think I will ask the co-chair if he is amenable to dispensing with some of the formality today. I definitely don't want folks talking over each other, and we want to be respectful. But at the same time, we do want to allow each other to share. And so, maybe it's in raising hands virtually so that we can kind of cue that up. But we're going to be asking these questions of everyone and hopefully getting some insights from each and every one of you as we go through this first set of questions. And then we'll take a short break and then we will come back and work on Economic Development 101. And so with that, I'm going to start jumping through some of these slides. And the first one is kind of a big one. And I'd really hope that all of us can share why we're here. And Mr. Co-Chair, you are in charge of this meeting, and you can go about this as you see fit. But I'm happy to help out in any way or allow you to facilitate this.
So I would agree with Josh. I'd like to dispense with at least a little of the formality. Um, you guys all know me well enough by now. I'd rather just facilitate the conversation than worry about the Robert's rules for a work session. I would suggest and ask that we use the raise hand feature. That way we can use it kind of as almost a virtual talking stick. So that way we hand it around, we're not talking over each other, and we could keep track of making sure that we can get everybody's voice and thoughts heard on these topics, because they really are just as diverse of thoughts as we all are as people, but they're all as equally important. So I think, yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and proceed with question number one around why are we here? Well, let's not all raise our hands at once here. Um, Josh, I'm not sure. Did you have a specific way you wanted to facilitate this, or did you just want to do this as a roundtable? And if need be, I'll just start calling on people.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, I was thinking that
Yeah,
that people
I don't,
can raise their hand and go to town. I will that as long as it takes. So the more we pause, the longer it'll take.
oh, Mr. Renzo, I think, yeah, you get voice number one here.
I'm glad to break the ice. I'm Sarah Dorenza. I'm the governor's deputy policy director, and I decided I could be the one to break the ice because I'm kind of new at these meetings, and I appreciate being able to participate from the governor's office and represent the governor with the business council board. The reason the governor's office is here because we're your partners in supporting you through the process to examine the entity, the functions, the statutory structure, and work alongside you and the legislature to really refine the business council's purpose and goals and the services and supports they can provide to Wyoming businesses and the economic development landscape. I've been with the governor's office for about 3 years now in a bunch of different capacities, but I was also the executive director of the Wyoming Economic Development Association for about 8 months. But the bulk of my career has been working in state government, especially in the executive branch, and I work in a bunch of diverse policy areas, including economic development. So I hope that I can offer some guidance as you work through this process and some input from the governor along the way, and also help you refine any messaging or goals that you want to bring to the legislature. And then also I'll be your partner in supporting your budget recommendations for the supplemental. So thank you for having me here, and I look forward to working with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And also would appreciate if you have any personal thoughts to add into this too, especially given your experience in the state and having, left for some other experiences and come back, please feel free to share those as well too. So
Thank you.
Mr. Pivot.
You knew I couldn't be quiet, right, Derek? And I know Josh is smiling. Guys, the reason I wanted to be on this board is mostly because I don't think the public knows what we do and why we do it, to be honest with you. Being in business for over 28 years and probably would have had the ability to get grants or loans at certain stages of my business would have been nice to know about. I guess some of it is my own fault. The other thing is economic growth in the state, especially in the southwestern corner, is stifled because of our friends at Rocky Mountain Power. And after meeting with them last week, I found out they're not very good managers of their time, their resources, or of their money. And that's got us strapped here. And want to be very forward about it, that I'm going to be pushing them along with, I hope, the governor's office, pushing Rocky Mountain Power to build the infrastructure within the state of Wyoming for us to grow.
So Bruce, I appreciate that. I want to rephrase it just for a second and see if it still applies or not. I mean, it really seems like one of the things why you're here and one of your main thoughts through this and lots of other conversations you and I have had is how do we help as a business council to remove some of those outside barriers and start pushing on things, whether it's power or otherwise, to really allow for growth. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I think one of the other problems and I find this, only being here about 16 months now, I find out that I think our name is wrong. I think business council is the wrong word. I think the word business shouldn't be in there because everybody thinks that we're supposed to go out and grab, NVIDIA and tell them to move to Rock Springs, you know. But what we're really doing right now, from what I see, and Josh, you can tell me if I'm full of crap or not, we're building infrastructure so those people can come here. Don't get me wrong, we give grants for certain things for growth or for businesses, or we help with that depending on what the governor's office or the legislator lets us do. But yeah, I think you're right, Derek, in your statement.
Fantastic. I mean, I'll jump in with my perspective here. One of my main thoughts of wanting to join the business council was really around how can we make a difference? How can we continue to reposition our state, not looking at just growth and diversification, but how do we continue towards long-term success? So not just meaning what are new things that we find, but what are new things and how do we support what we've already got? This is something, kind of that came together as I was thinking through the questions that Sarah sent out. I think what becomes a slightly different perspective in this state is when you're someone that's worked or lived or both outside of the state of Wyoming and can bring in some ideas or things that you've seen succeed elsewhere. And that's one of the things, at least, that I view as a positive that I can bring to the table is having grown up other places, worked other places, really having worked all over the Mountain West. How can we bring some of those ideas that we learned somewhere else back here to Wyoming and help them take root? So that's kind of the summary of my thoughts. Jason, you're going to get targeted next because you're first one I see on the screen, buddy.
That's all right. I was just sitting here thinking through, the question of what are the experiences, expertise, or circumstances that give or other strengths I have that contribute. When I look at our panel of board members, I feel a bit under maybe qualified to be here with all of you folks, but I think the thing that I bring is just more a passion to want to see the best for Wyoming, not just for myself and my neighbors, but definitely for my children. I'm at that point in life where my kids are getting ready to enter into the world of not being under my care, and I want to make sure that they have all that is available to them, made available to them here, where I am, where they can enjoy the things that they've enjoyed up to this point in their own careers and in their own lives. And so I think it's deeply personal to me, but then, maybe from just an experience perspective, I think the thing that I am excited about is with the expansion of broadband, which is my industry throughout the state, it gives the flexibility for us to be on an equal playing field with the rest of the nation with regards to technology, our ability to be connected, and even our ability to influence or entice folks to come here, knowing that there's not going to be a technology gap or disadvantage by living in a remote location like Wyoming compared to somewhere in a metropolitan area. So from an industry perspective, I think we are helping position the state to be very alluring. But from a personal experience, I would say it's just really, I want to have my kids enjoy the rights and privileges and opportunities that I've enjoyed.
Fantastic. I mean, I can just keep going down the line, guys, because that's what I'm going to do. If so, Cassie, you're up next.
Randy did have her hand
Randy,
raised.
yeah, Randy had a
Oh,
hand
she
raised.
did? Perfect. Thank you, Brandy. Gold star for you.
Gee, thanks. I was just gonna, get it over with. So, just kidding. Here we go. So I'm here because, well, besides the fact that Eric asked me to, I very much, the future of the state of Wyoming matters to me a lot. I've been a banker in this state for over 20 years. I was born here, raised here. I've served on several boards, including the LCBA, the Laramie Economic Development Board. And I, as a part of my role, is to naturally support business. I would like to see every business succeed, because when they succeed, my employer can succeed. So that's really, really important. But also economic development, in that I've heard my entire life growing up that we need to diversify, we need to make sure Wyoming moves forward. And I just haven't seen a lot of that happen. And so I wanted to be a part of a group of people who can help make these things happen, make change happen, and grow. Also on a personal note, similar to Jason, my kids are growing up. It's time for them to move on, and I would like them to move on here. Wyoming's the best place to be. I want them to stay. I want them to have an opportunity to further their education, which is awesome because we can definitely do that. But then find a way to build a life here. And not just for my kids, but all their friends, everybody. So for that, it's a big deal for me, both personally and professionally. So that's kind of why I'm here. And I'm happy to get to be here, though.
Thank you, Brandy. Okay, Cassie, unless I'm missing another hand, back to you.
Okay, all right. I think I'm here because Wyoming was the place that I chose to come from, where I was born and raised, and I've been able to create and sustain a life um, with many more opportunities than I would have in the state that I grew up in. And I have more time in Wyoming than I did there. So it kind of counts as home, even though I'm not a local yet. I know that's still a thing. Um, Over 20 years ago, when I took my Wyoming government class, the first time I stepped into a college room in the state, we read Pushed Off the Mountain, Sold Down the River. And that was my first awareness of some of the patterns of Wyoming's kind of economic existence. And I think that has been a curious thing for me. Since then, I've been entrenched in serving people and communities in the state, and seeing kind of pockets that get left behind and miss opportunities. And that's something I'm passionate about bringing forward and hoping to plug in as a cog into these systems that can make it more effective and utilize all of our people that we have, and not just the people who tend to show up in these spaces. So that's kind of where I'm sitting today with my why.
Awesome. Thanks, Cassie. I think that is important. How do we bring people to the table who don't traditionally come there? Kind of like this conversation and what you guys are helping demonstrate right now. You have a first couple people that are willing to jump up and say something, and then a little bit of silence, and then a few more, and then it seems like it kind of becomes a struggle partway through. So that's how do we continue to engage everybody, right? And then how do we continue these conversations with everyone when they want to be involved or not? Well, then how about Melissa?
Get myself off of mute, and I'm happy to, Derek. Yeah, thank you. I also represent the other 50% of the state population, which was not born in Wyoming. I too am a move-in, moved here about 20 years ago. And I too am glad to be here. I've had some great experiences here. I was able to raise my kids here in Green River, went to the high school where I taught, and that has been a blessing to me, having them so close to me. Since then, they've all graduated and they have indeed left the state. And I don't want to see that become my inevitable outcome as well through seeking different employment. I don't want to take a job just with what jobs are available. I would like to see opportunities for jobs come to all of us, so that as employment changes inevitably, because that is the way the state functions, we have varied places that we can go and participate to benefit our communities and the state itself. I've participated on workforce development on many levels. I've been involved in the Next Gen Sector Partnership since about 2022, which has allowed me the ability to participate in Governor Gordon's RIDE program, which also ties into the WHIP program. And it's interesting to see, when we understand the components at play in our government systems and economic systems, how they can really integrate and play together to benefit everyone in the state of Wyoming. I also took a job for a startup company under carbon management. Enjoyed working for them. They were not able to land in Wyoming, so that helped me recognize some of the barriers and constraints that Wyoming faces. I too agree with Bruce. I don't think we should be called the Wyoming Business Council. I think we need to be called something to the effect of the Wyoming Economic Development Council, because we're not here just to recruit and bring in businesses. We can't bring in businesses if we have underlying constraints to economic development. Those need to be addressed. In our meeting with Rocky Mountain Power, I was there with Bruce also. Maybe some little different takeaways. Rocky Mountain Power is also a business that needs to stay in business and function for the benefits of its consumers. But I think we need to look at our different possibilities for power acquisition. Traditional forms are not going to be able to grow Wyoming like we're really looking to go. Energy is really under a transition and innovation happening in those different sectors, and I think we need to be open to see and recognize what those transitions are so that we can help the state grow. So I think it's a lot bigger. I think we need to understand the backbone of our economic development so that we can find workarounds. It's not just a no, it's a how do we progress, understanding what those constraints are, because there's always room for growth. And then I think it's important to recognize that Wyoming is a state who has been blessed with abundant resources, but in economic theory, there's also the economic development, or sorry, the resource curse. And we live under a bit of that resource curse. So we need to find ways to transition into growth in a different way. It's possible that we next are going to fall under the intelligence curse with AI, but that just means that we need to learn how to operate a little bit differently and keep in mind that workforce development is key for that growth. So I'm happy to be here and serve and do what I can for the council as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think it's always interesting, you guys are both in the same meeting, but have different perspectives. And again, that's the same how we all look at things, right? Katie, glad to hear from the Casper contingent.
I'll just go ahead and jump right on in. I do have a very strong background in construction and infrastructure. For the past 17 years, we fought very hard to how do Wyoming contractors compete against the out-of-state contractors here in Wyoming. We spent a majority of our time on workforce development, looking at the state statutes to see how can we assist the local businesses that are already here. Obviously, everyone's very familiar with our infrastructure needs, how our infrastructure is failing across the state, whether it's our road, bridges, highways, dams. We do have a huge deficit in infrastructure. I spent a lot of time working within that infrastructure range, especially with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. We do a very good job of looking at bringing businesses in, but what about those, for instance, Wyoming contractors that really can't compete? You look at I-25 here in Casper right now, the third phase of rehabbing the bridges and the highways, it's an out-of-state contractor that's priming that job. However, it is an in-state contractor who's doing that bridge. Why is it more economic for out-of-state contractors to come into the state of Wyoming and work, but yet our Wyoming contractors are put at a disadvantage and can't compete? So I do have a huge passion on looking at and assisting Wyoming businesses to help them grow, to help them compete, to look at what we need to change in that. I also spend a lot of time on workforce development. It's extremely difficult to do the projects we need, whether it's, building hospitals, um, schools. If we do not have the workforce, how can we continue to grow? How can we continue to get that infrastructure there to what we need in Wyoming? So I do have a very good passion for infrastructure, workforce development, and I would really like us to see not only look at bringing more businesses into the state of Wyoming. I think we really need to focus on our local businesses here. I now work with Black Hills Bentonite here in Casper. And they're looking at hopefully doing some different type of expansion and different type of the ways that they take that bentonite to see what may be, useful, whether it's in the medical industry, whether it's in the cosmetic, whether it's in the food grain. But they do need assistance sometimes in doing that. So I would really like to see the Wyoming Business Council focus more on how can we help the Wyoming businesses that are already here in Wyoming to help them grow and give them the workforce and the tools that they need in order to do that.
Great points, Katie, and appreciate your background coming onto this board with that construction aspect, that the construction and the infrastructure side. I mean, that's huge. And I think that's one of the conversations that we've seen come out of legislative session. And one of the things that we continue to address is there's an infrastructure need. Where does that fall? Where's the right place for it? And new infrastructure versus, I almost want to say repair, but in some cases, that's not a strong enough word. I think rebuild is probably a better one. But I think those are great conversations we need to address. The other one, and this just came up in a conversation I had yesterday that I look forward to your thoughts on too, is not just how do we help Wyoming compete with other states, but how do we create an environment where our contractors stay and build projects in Wyoming rather than going to our adjacent states and building in all the major population centers there. So thank you so much for that, Katie. Well, since we're already in Casper, Beth, what do you think?
I want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're kind of quiet, but you just got better.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. In terms of experience, expertise, my background is in policy, health, and community development, and I just think that those things are really linked with the work at the Wyoming Business Council. The ability for our state to grow stronger through economic development is really tied also to our ability to recruit and keep healthcare providers and keep families and keep volumes high so that our communities can thrive. So I've got some expertise in getting things through the legislature and working with the executive branch, and then just an eye toward the things that matter in our communities. Good jobs, obviously, but good healthcare, good, safe, affordable housing as well. And so I like working on those issues with my business council hat.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. Rachel, you should have seen this one coming a mile away. You're next.
I know it. I don't know how much I can say that hasn't already been said, but I have lived here my whole life. So Wyoming always has been home. Now I had family that left for California, and I'm a little surprised I did not go there because I love that area. But I feel like I was fortunate that my husband has a business here and he has an environment that's made his business successful. I was fortunate to go to, get my education for a very affordable price and get jobs as a result of that, which has kept me here. My two adult sons are fortunate. They are both here, and I want to keep them here and so that they still have opportunities. So I think, and my professional career has kind of been on the side of the human services, nonprofit, kind of that community development piece, and then the last 13, 14 years in higher ed. So more on that publicly supported piece that is such a crucial player with economic development that sometimes gets forgotten how integral it is to making viable communities. And I think even though on the strictly focus on business and economic development, I think what really intrigued me when I first was looking at the Business Council is the efforts that were being put to, like what Beth just said, with healthcare, childcare, housing, those things that we have to have for a viable community so that we can keep our existing businesses and people here and attract new. And I hope that we can still have those conversations to ensure that we're making that a strong piece of our communities as well, because if we don't have those services, we can't keep people here.
Well, thank you so much. And that's a solid point, right? Jobs are one part of the puzzle for people, not every piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, you need to be in a place where you feel like you can get all those ancillary services that are really important to your quality of life.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go goes straight north. Mr. Kinski.
Hey, hello, good afternoon. I'm here first and foremost because I'm a big fan of the Business Council. I've seen when the Business Council is operating at its best, it can do for a community with a community in Sheridan. And when I saw all this chatter about it needs to be abolished, um, and I believe a lot of that was not due to anything that the Business Council was doing wrong per se, but just an ideological belief by some that we just shouldn't be doing what we're doing, period. But I believe that what the Business Council has been doing, and as near as I understand it, continues to be doing, is the right course of action. And so let me tell you a little bit about that, what my perspective is, and maybe things have changed, but I don't think so. First of all, my motivation is I grew up in Sheridan, and I can distinctly remember the day I was on the football field in practice, and this one friend of mine turned to me and he said, "Where are you going when you graduate?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, we can't stay here. There's nothing to do. I mean, my brother's in California. I've got a sister in Denver." And I hadn't really given it any thought. And then, as I progressed through school, I realized so many of my classmates were thinking about where they were going. And, it's natural for kids to want to go out and see the world, but it wasn't because just of that, but there just wasn't a whole lot of choice. So then you zip ahead. I had to leave the state due to lack of economic opportunity. I built a business, sold it, moved back to town, and people started lobbying me to run for mayor. And I realized that the conversation on economic development hadn't changed in 20 years, which is they were talking about it, but nothing was happening. And so I ran on an economic development platform. The only reason I ever got involved in politics, and the only reason I'm here today, the only reason I went to the legislature, is economic development and jobs, 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 good paying jobs. Otherwise, your state just dries up and it just blows away. So I was very fortunate that we were blessed with a regional rep named Dave Spencer. And he had heard my conversation, and he said, "Let me tell you how the Business Council works. If you have a vision for your community, we can help you. But Cheyenne can't give you that vision. You have to have it yourself. Now, if you need help with planning grants, we can do that. With expertise, we can do that. But it has to start with you. There has to be local leadership and local vision." I think that's still the way the Business Council operates, and I think that's the way it should continue to operate. What they need in Rock Springs and whatever the battle is with Rocky Mountain Power is different than what we need in Sheridan, is different than what they need in Crook County. And I still think the Business Council operates that way. We're not going into communities telling them what they need to do, but we will help them build and fashion their own vision, and then help them find the right tools to help make that happen. And sometimes that's reaching out and bringing outside businesses in, if it's a Weatherby. Sometimes it's building a business park, if it's a genuine business park and not an excuse to get a grant for water and sewer that the locals don't want to pay for themselves. Whatever it is, maybe it's educational opportunities, but that has to come from the local communities. Our backbone, our front lines are those regional representatives, and the work that they do in terms of knowing their communities. And then, if you've got some local elected leadership that is either dead on their butts or doesn't care or doesn't want growth, there's not a whole lot we can do, because we can't go in and tell them what to do. The legislature can't do that. The governor can't do that. They have to want it. And if they want it, we've got lots of tools to help them with. Now, it turns out over the years, we've perhaps been laden with more tools than we actually need, because it looks like there's been I wouldn't call it mission creep. It just looks like we've almost become a home for every program that couldn't find a home somewhere else. So we've got a lot of barnacles stuck to the boat bottom that need to be scraped so that we can focus on our primary mission. But until somebody convinces me otherwise, I think the structure of the business council as it is, with the front line being those regional reps knowing their communities and being that liaison, effectively our loan officer to Cheyenne, I think we've got a great model. I think we need to get out the word about the model that we've got and keep pushing forward. That's why I'm here. I've got a big passion for the business council. I think we do great work, and we just need to get the word out about it. Other than that, I have no strongly held opinions.
Well, Dave, I appreciate those thoughts, and I especially appreciate the comment around you can't make a community, you can't make somebody want something for them. I think that's a great example of why we're all here is we're not sitting here trying to have someone tell us, oh, you want this to be important. Everyone sitting here in this board meeting believes this is important. We're not having to make anybody want anything. It's how do we work together for it. So it's exciting. Thanks for those thoughts, Dave.
You bet.
Mark, you're last, and there's a reason why I kept you for last because I knew you'd already shared these thoughts over the weekend during graduation. So I knew you'd had a little bit of time to put that together because I heard you once. So I figured I'd save you for last.
Well, and everybody knows my points. And Mr. Chair, I gave this presentation on, I tried to be reflective and talk about kids coming back. I've never had a speech bomb more in my life. It bombed. But with that said, I am here because I want to see kids in Wyoming stay in Wyoming. I don't necessarily subscribe to the I don't want them to leave. I think that it's important that you leave because then I think that's when you realize how great Wyoming is. But I think there needs to be better pathways to get them here. I grew up in Wyoming. I was on the county commission for 7 years. I'm a UW graduate. I have a master's from the University of Denver in real estate and construction management. And when I was a commissioner, we did some good things. We built what I would say was probably the most effective local government natural resource lobbying group in the country. And I love what Wyoming represents, like the business council, because Wyoming's that place where if there's a good idea, you can usually get the right people in the room. Everybody can bring a little bit of funding and you can get it done. And the reason I put my name in for the business council was I feel like Wyoming is broken at the legislative level. And I think sometimes that's about taking credit. And I feel like the business council is about getting things done. And I want to be part of a group that gets things done. And I think that what the business council does is important. I met with Derek right after I got appointed, and I told him the same thing a number of you said. I think that the name is partially deceptive to people. But I also, having done the local government thing for 7 years, and this was me coming from a place that had, from a county that had resources, there are a lot of communities that don't. And until that's addressed, and I understand that the question is whether or not that fits in the business council. There's a part of me that says it doesn't, but I also think that when it comes to which group could probably help advise and make the best decisions on that, I would say this group is probably right up there at the top. And so I want to advocate that we address some of our structural issues. So it would be the brain drain, the youth leaving, and sustainable funding for local government, and just good economic opportunity. Because I know in my own life, I look at it all the time. It's like it'd be a lot easier to leave, but Wyoming's a good place to be, and it's a good place to raise kids. And it's a good place to get a great education. We just need you to stay after we make that investment in you. So thanks, Derek.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Um, that's some great thoughts from everybody in there. And I think what's interesting looking at that is there's a lot of through lines. We all said some very similar things just in a different way, which segues really nicely into this next slide. So, Josh.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, thanks. I think this idea of why we're here also has to tie into why we care about the future. And I think many of us started down that path. But I do think it's important to really begin to think about the future and why you care about it. Because as we cast a vision for what the Wyoming economy can be, and as we go out there and talk about it, it's really important again that we have not just what goes on up here and what the tactics are, but also what happens in here and in our heart, because I think it's going to need that to make some of these structural changes that we've all sort of brushed up against, or we know we need to make. So with that, I think let's start it off there and have folks chime in on this.
For sure. I actually, Mark, since you talked and you brought it up last, I kind of want to start with your thoughts around this one. And especially, that moment that it hit home for you, because it sounds like, especially with, leaving to go to DU to get your master's degree, that sort of thing, you experienced personally that idea of you have to leave and come back.
Yeah, I think so. I guess in terms of economic decline, I have, when I was a commissioner, we had the highest assessed valuation ever. And then 2 years later, we had the lowest in like 10 years. And it was a profound swing. It was also the same time when both Peabody and Arch announced 500 layoffs on the same day. And then we went through a Cloud Peak bankruptcy. We went through trying to collect almost $100 million in ad valorem taxes. And I think sometimes people would say like that was a Campbell County problem. It's not a Campbell County problem because all but 3 school districts received money from recapture. It was a state of Wyoming problem. And at the time, we didn't have good tools for it. And I've seen when I gave that presentation the other day, I tried to make this point. I went back and looked at how much, if you went to school in Campbell County and you graduated this last Sunday, the district had invested about 215 to 225,000 in your education in those 13 years. So if you're a rural district, it's probably closer to like 250 or 300. And I think it's great that we can do that. I like what Wyoming is. But we're doing this thing right now where we give all these kids this great education and we give you really almost free college with Hathaway, which is such a great opportunity. And then they leave. And we're doing this great job of developing economies in Colorado and Utah and Montana and Idaho. And I just would like to see those people stay here. It used to be that Wyoming had this kind of, I used to say as a commissioner that we were kind of like a colony in the sense that it was like our coal or oil or gas came in and then it was shipped out back to England or France or wherever you were originally. And it was processed where the jobs were. And that's where the wealth was created. And we're still like that in a lot of ways. We've made some investments and we're starting to change some of that. But now it's even worse because now what's harvested is just our young people and their minds, and they're leaving. And when I talk to people I went to school with and everybody else, it's like everybody wants to come back to Wyoming, but nobody wants to come back to Wyoming to take a huge cut in pay or to not be able to get health insurance or to do some of the other things. And there's these structural issues that we have got to address because even when the economy's great here, if you're in the energy world, it's still those structural issues are still preventing growth. And I think it's hard too, because I think that some of it is messaging, but I think some of it's a lack of understanding because like Gillette, Casper, Cheyenne, Sheridan. I think they're all places that are okay with growth, and they're places that are growing. Um, a lot of the other places don't want any growth, but what they don't realize is if you're not growing, you're dying. And that is like fundamentally how it works in community development. And I think that at some point there needs to be some hard conversations about, I don't subscribe to that model of we should let these small towns die. I do not believe that at all. But I think that at some point we have to have the conversation that's like, you want to be a good partner, you want to grow, you want to be a place for people to come back to, you've got to do some things to make it attractive. Because if it were strictly tax policy, everybody would be here. And they're not. It's like there's lots of decisions that go into whether or not you move back and where you choose to live. So it was when all those people were laid off. That was hard. And I will say too that then the next year at the county, it was kind of like trying to balance the budget, and then we had reserves, but then did you deploy reserves knowing that 500 people had been laid off? Like there was things like that made it hard.
For sure. That was a really tough part in there. And I appreciate the comment there too of almost the harvesting of young people right now, kind of similarly to what we've done with our natural resources. Instead of value adding here, we value add somewhere else. So great thought. Melissa.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to jump right off of that, talking about young people. That's one of the reasons why I left education. I didn't leave education teaching high school because I hated it. I left because I actually loved it, but I saw that youth out migration. And although I had 3 kids in my household, I had 150 kids every year in my classroom at school. And where did they have to go? They just didn't have anywhere to go. So when a startup company wanted to come into the area, I thought, well, that's a great opportunity for me to move the needle forward just a little bit more and participate with those high school kids in the next part of their lives. So, yes, me wanting to bring new business into the area and the community, it's because the people you live with in your community, they're your own. They're your family too. They really become a part of you. You don't want to see them take off and leave. So I saw that quite frequently, readily, as you know, with our young people. When We Soda bought out Genesis, this was another eye-opening moment for me. They laid off a lot of their top management, some of their middle level management. I've participated in the Southwest Wyoming Manufacturing Partnership group on their leadership team for, I believe, well over 5 years now. And a lot of those people working out at Genesis also were participating in that next gen sector partnership. You want to talk about the possibility of blowing up a next gen sector partnership and losing that? That's when people lose their jobs and they're not sure where they're going to go out into the community. One of the people that was let go at Genesis, his wife worked at a very high level at Western Wyoming Community College. So if he leaves, we also lose her as part of the community. So it's a really far-reaching hand when we don't have economic development to provide sustainability. And that's why I'm here. I want to move the needle. I want to do things. So that's why I care. Thanks.
No, thank you, Melissa. I'm sitting here making notes as all you talk, and you're bringing up things that I hadn't thought about, but it makes such perfect sense of, you know, that concept of the trailing spouse, right? If you're talking about a couple leaving, that's someone we need both of them in our community. But if we don't have the diversity that the second job is enough to support both of them, then we leave both partners or we lose them both. So that's an important point to think about when we're talking the diversity and everything else of what we want to pursue and the importance. Randy.
Thanks. The trailing spouse thing caught my attention because of the university, of course. We face that here in Laramie all the time. And it's a big deal. So when the university was up against losing a significant portion of its budget, I remember that being a moment, because we certainly spend a lot of time talking about not only those positions that could get cut, which have been cut in the past, of course, as well. But then there's the other side of that couple that leaves as well. So that's small businesses, that's all kinds of employees for other. Anyway, that's a huge thing for us here in Laramie. But to get back to the question, I guess what matters a lot to me, and maybe a moment or hundreds that hit home, are where there's too many projects that are hit with an automatic no when they would be for the greater good. I don't like the automatic no. Too many folks are worried about their own backyard rather than the big picture. There's several moments like that. For example, anytime I hear a hospital cutting maternity care or closing altogether, anytime I hear about an apartment building that was considering being constructed, and it gets shut down immediately due to, many complaints, but one of which was that it would alter the skyline view. That kind of stuff makes me lose my mind. Because really it is about the greater good. And I guess I'm in that boat where I would really like to see all these things happen, as long as they're thought through. I mean, we had this come up before, where even if the population of Wyoming doubled, that we're still not a blip on the radar. So I think for people to be so quick to say no is very short-sighted, and that is how we end up losing the young folks, and that's how we end up losing the professionals. So I guess all of those circumstances combined, I don't have a single moment. There's just so many. So I really want to be a part of people who say yes. So that's what I'd share.
Love it. Be a part of the people who say yes. How do we make that a slogan for the state, Randy? How do we start making that change? Jason.
Yeah, I appreciate Randy's position, because I too agree. If I would say I've seen something, it's the willingness to say no before yes. Um, a lot of us live in Wyoming because of its ruralness, and we enjoy that about it. We enjoy the sceneries of the state, and we're very protective of that. And I think a lot of our population thinks that in an effort to be protect that, or in an effort to protect that, they are limiting our ability to grow, when that's exactly what really is for the best interest of the state. So I actually find what Randy was saying very intriguing, and I would actually agree and echo that. That's probably what I've personally experienced the most, is just this resistance to growth. Even though we all know that's what we need, and deep down that's what we want. We want our kids to stay here, but I also don't want to disrupt my view. So there's a balance there.
Yeah, Cassie.
It's a good time to follow along. My husband works in oil and gas. We've seen feast and famine in the 20 plus years that we've been here just through his. So I can't even, like others, I can't even track how many times that's impacted different things in our lives. There was a couple in Rock Springs that just moved to Texas, of and from, born and bred Rock Springs, both worked at the college, and now they're in a state that I never thought they'd be in. Devastating loss with the experience and contributions that they've made, and they took their adult son with them. That community is going to suffer with their absence. Now, I think in thinking about the potential for change and that resistance that so many people have kind of mentioned, I think I'm wondering how the business council, or whatever name we end up being, possibly if that changes, how can we empower communities and those in power, or those who will be elected into power, to grow in alignment with with values. That way it doesn't seem like it's something that they don't have a choice in. How can we facilitate construction of what we want the future to be in these smaller places that don't have systems built in that are successful, right? Like how can we grow them up to be something that aligns and keeps Wyoming the beautiful place? Like I'm sitting here and I can see a red-tailed hawk out the window soaring by. You don't get that many places. So how can we keep those features intact, but also create room for development?
Yeah, that's I mean, they're all great points, but that's a big one. How do we work with the smaller and the larger communities to keep the features and the amenities for the natural amenities intact, um, along with growth? And the cool thing is we've got a lot of people and can come to those creative solutions. It's just helping them get there and removing those barriers to it happening. Bruce, we haven't heard from you this round, buddy. What do you think?
I knew you wouldn't let me be quiet.
I'm
So,
not letting anybody be quiet on this one today, Bruce.
when you talk about personally experienced economic decline, obviously, our company was in oil and gas and coal and a lot of that kind of industry. You go from a $12 million a year company, small company, to a $2 million a year company. You have economic decline within in yourself. And what we find out is a couple of things now. We would like to expand even more. Our biggest problem is we can't find any skilled labor. That's a problem. We talk about not having our young youth leave the state of Wyoming. I can guarantee you that if any of them get into the trades, they never have to leave Wyoming and they'll make really, really good money. Um, so one of the things I think that why we're root bound in Wyoming for economic growth is the need for employees, but that's like there's other things that happen there. Housing's a big deal. We can't find affordable housing, as we know what's going on with Cheyenne. We have the same problem here in Rock Springs. I'm sure Green River does also. Diversity for the spouse, that's a big deal, and I know when we say that that's a big deal, and I understand that, if like at the university we lose an instructor, we might lose two. Here in Sweetwater County, it's the same deal. Again, what Western Wyoming Community College is going to lose even more, which means we're going to lose more on both sides. So my problem is being on the council is kind of twofold for me, but growing our economy, we have to take a look at what's making us root bound and why we can't keep our youth here, and maybe educate some of our youth. Not every, my dad always used to tell me, you still have to have garbage men. I'm not saying garbage men makes great money, but we also have to have mechanics. We also have to have welders. We also have to have all that other stuff. And both of my children have left the state of Wyoming, and mostly, I mean, my son's in college athletics. So if you're not, he was at Wyoming and he moved on because it was the right thing for him. Will he ever come back? Well, someday, who knows? My daughter is just her spouse um, lost his job in Wyoming and moved to Colorado. So we know how that happens. So I hear everybody talk about everything, and there's not one disagreement in my mind. There's just so many problems that we need to tackle, but one of them has to be infrastructure and housing, or we can't diversify this state. I'm sorry.
Points well taken, Bruce. One side note that I had, maybe to stick in our heads as we think through this. Also, how do we help with those folks who are in skilled labor to understand or establish those as transferable skills as industries adjust? I know that's one thing that I'll look at up here. People can be so married to the fact of, well, I'm a coal miner. I work at the coal mine, and really getting them to instead look at it and go, I'm a skilled materials handler, or great, you're a mechanic at a coal mine, but then you can also be a mechanic in the oil field. You can be a mechanic at the diesel shop, realizing that those skills are transferable. But a lot of times it seems like you talk to people and there just isn't that understanding. So maybe that's something to put a slight pin in as we work through these things of maybe there's an easier win in just trying to get people to understand transference. So, Rachel.
Thanks, Derek. That's exactly where I was going to go with Bruce's comment. I mean, I totally agree and I'm an advocate for the trades. That's the job that I do as dean of the School of Business and Industry. I mean, I have all the trade programs, all career in tech ed. But the challenge is, even though is a huge demand, there is work wherever you want to look for it in those areas, we cannot pull the people into the programs to get trained to fill those jobs. And we haven't been able to crack that. I don't know what it is. We can offer free training and a guaranteed job, and you still cannot get people to come train for these programs. So I think that is something that is really important that, I mean, we're talking about in this field is how do we promote career and technical education at a level that parents, grandparents understand its importance so that that trickles down to the youth so they can see the value in these jobs. But it is a tough one that I don't know anybody has figured out how to solve, but that's a big piece of it is trying to get people into these careers so where they can really make an impact and have very steady work with good pay.
Excellent point, Rachel, especially you're in the middle of trying to do it. Yeah, Katie.
Yeah, I'll just tack on to what Rachel was saying with the trades. Doing a lot of workforce development, we would obviously go into a lot of the high schools and junior highs and talk about basically construction, plumbing, HVAC, all the other different types of the trades. And what we found out in visiting with the students is that there was a lot of resistance from their parents and grandparents to go into the trades. So even though the individuals, the students themselves had interest, they were getting pressure from the parents that no, you need to go the traditional route for your education instead of entering into the trade. So that's a huge barrier is it's not necessarily the students, it's their family members provide, encourage them not to do that. Another hurdle that we came upon quite a bit is especially at the University of Wyoming, and I'll use construction management as an example, that it was actually out-of-state contractors who provided additional money to the program. They got the first interview opportunities with their construction students who are graduating. It wasn't the Wyoming companies that were allowed to come in and do the interviews. It was the companies from out of state that was contributing money to the program that got the first crack at our students, even though a lot of those students, went through schooling with the Hathaway and Wyoming funded, but they were not allowed to be interviewed by Wyoming construction companies first. So those type of hurdles are huge. Also with students leaving, I'll just use my niece for example. She actually is in Rochester, Minnesota right now, and take the politics of Minnesota out of this. But her and her husband just had their first baby. They would like to leave and go elsewhere, but with the benefits that Minnesota provides for them, that they can basically both of them stay home for almost a year, raising their child and getting almost their full salaries from some of the benefits there. So they're really contemplating staying there until they're done having children before they're moving because of the benefits that they receive in Minnesota. So sometimes it's not necessarily what Wyoming has to offer. Sometimes it's some of the benefits that are out there as well that keeps individuals and kids that grew up in Wyoming from coming back to Wyoming because we don't have a lot of those benefits.
Katie, I was just going to ask you to come back to the question, but your example is perfect. And I want to challenge one thing you said there for all of our thinking, where you said take the politics out of it. I think if we're talking about how do we get people to either not leave or come back, there's probably a certain amount of it that we can't ignore that is tied to those more social programs, more social issues. Is that something we can address as the business council? Probably not. But I think it is possible. It is important for us to remember that those things do carry a certain amount of weight in those decisions. and acknowledging
Exactly.
things like you said, if you can stay home for a much more significant amount of time with your new child as opposed to having to get back to work after a week or 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I think that's really important to at least acknowledge and make sure we're factoring that in our calculus. Um,
Correct. And they both would, my niece would love to come back to Wyoming and work, but the benefits of working, at a very large hospital and some of the programs that the state has makes it very difficult for them to do so.
for sure. Yeah, Mark, I know you answered once, so if we've got
Right.
a quick hit there, that'd be awesome. I just want to make sure we get a chance for everybody to
Yep.
talk as we are trying to get through all these questions.
I wanted to tack on to what Katie said because that was so important because we've seen that same thing here with with jobs in the trades, and jobs in trades are really well paid here. So you'd think that the kids would be routed that way, but I've talked to quite a few of them, and it's because their parents are used to like coal and oil and gas being really up and down. And so even though it's been really good pay, they don't want that for their kids. So like they're looking at it as they want their kids to have something stable. They don't want to run these risks of having a big group laid off at one time, or even when methane fell apart and there was all of these people who left town. And it's it's interesting because like we look at that as those people are really well paid and you different these things here. And it's the same reason we have trouble sometimes getting kids in school, at least at the K-12 level, to do the pathways because the parents are more like, get a college education. I don't want you to have this instability that I had.
That's a good reminder, especially in our communities like ours, Mark, where they've seen a lot of that over the years. Beth, what you
I
thinking?
don't think I have anything to add, Derek. I think the conversation so far has been really good. I don't have anything unique, so we can move along.
Okay. Sounds like a plan to me. Anybody else have any other thoughts before we keep rolling?
I have
Yeah,
a
Uh,
quick one, if it's
yeah.
Cassie, I
okay.
just saw your hand. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I think one area, I mean, we're talking about youth and all that, but I would just like to keep reentry and criminal justice involved folks on our brains too. I think if we could make more robust opportunities for training in trades and things like that, it's really hard to get a good job if you're a felon. But if you put in the work and you are recovered and you've paid your time, like they deserve a chance at a sustainable future. And I think that's a really big cross section that we tend to forget.
That is a good point. Very good point. Let's go with Dave and then Melissa, because that's the order they came through on my end.
Hey, you asked about personal experience. When I moved to Gillette, right out of law school, it was a booming place. And 3 years later, bankruptcies were just piling up. You could not believe how quickly the economy just collapsed, absolutely collapsed, including bankruptcy of some of you may remember the Stockman's Bank, which was just a long-standing institution in Campbell County, and it went down in bankruptcy along with a lot of others. We moved to Casper and did not escape it there. 3 years later, uh, I tell young audiences we sold a house. It was a quarter acre, fenced, 3 stories, 5 bedrooms, 2-car garage, $50,000. $50,000. And we were lucky to get it. So, in terms of the question here about how you may have been brushed by the economic decline, my wife and I suffered that personally. So, we know that. And it's so easy for people during good times to forget about those. But, if you wait until the bad times hit to do economic development, it's too late. This is not a game of months, it's a game of years. And you've got to be doing it through good times and bad. I want to mention one quick thing about the trades, as long as it came up, although it's not strictly on point. I'm on the Whitney board in Sheridan. We just completed a huge project on that. It's still underway. We invested over $500,000 into bringing in some folks to help us with what are the best practices nationwide to help children at the earliest grades and their parents to understand that there is life other than just going to a normal college route and coming out with $50,000 to $100,000 in debt. Mike Rowe makes the observation that people go to a 2-year technical degree are now out earning those with a 4-year bachelor's degree. And so we've had a long-standing thing here in Sheridan. Sounds like it's not exclusive to us. My kid's not working with his hands. My kid's going to college. But I got to tell you, you got to be pretty damn bright and pretty well educated to be able to operate in the trades these days, as some of these other folks can testify. So my wife and I toured a school that our community college president told us was the best VOTEC high school in the country. And I told the principal, I said, I took welding in high school because I heard every man should have a trade. She said, we say every scholar should have a skill. And she said, of all the kids that were at this trades high school, 3/4 of them went on to college. These are not, these are not people who can't cut it on the college path. These are bright kids who recognize there's a path to success that's other than the traditional, I'm going to get a bachelor's degree in economics and hope a job comes along. So
Sure,
Erin Kilbride, the executive director, I'd like to get her paired up with Josh, get him briefed up on this program that we've undertaken there, since I've heard so many people talking about promoting the trades. And I don't know, strictly speaking, that it's a business council thing, but I think it would be important for our business council folks to know about it.
I think always good to talk to more people. Melissa, I think we're going to have you as our last comment on this one, and then we'll move on to the next topic. And we'll go from there.
Thank you. I'll try and throw my ideas together cohesively quickly. I think everything I've listened to everybody say, completely true. It all pulls together. The Wyoming Department of Education has really been focused on each of these areas that you've spoke about for years now. So if you've had your finger in that, you can see the change in all that. The other important thing to note, what Dave said, these kids get educated in the trades, but they also are learning that education post high school in some form is a necessity to move forward and move on. I think it's a shift in mindset. Decades ago, we used to live just in a solely local economy. Then with the internet coming in and technology, we became maybe more of a statewide economy, a national economy. Really, these kids are preparing to live and work in a global economy. So those are the changes in conversation that we see and we face. I would challenge each of you, if you have a next gen sector partnership that's in your neighborhood and close by, see if you can attend a meeting with that next gen sector partnership. You'll see how they are partnering on behalf of business and industry, working with K through 12 community colleges and perhaps the University of Wyoming moving forward. A lot of this work is being done. I think there are segments of this work that not everybody understands and knows about. So the more exposure we can get in this area, the more impact that all of this will have moving forward. Thanks.
Absolutely, for sure. And Melissa, I do think you hit on a point that I want to make sure that we're acknowledging as we go through this. These last two slides, especially on things where it's the personal experience, that sort of thing. We just had a great conversation on the trades, but I think it's also worth acknowledging, like you said, Department of Ed's been doing a lot of work around this. There's a lot of other folks who have as well. So probably continuing to think a little bit more in terms of what can we do as a business council side, and sometimes that's as a partner, and sometimes it's leading the charge. But kind of keeping that in mind, that we don't want to do what others have done to us. That's broadened our scope far bigger than it should be. So just kind of keep that in mind, I guess. So, Mr. Durrell.
Yeah, thanks, Derek, and everybody. The other thing that keeps hitting me when everyone's talking is the complexity of the problem that we're working to solve. This is not a simple problem. There are many different facets to it, many different angles we're going to have to take. And what I think we've done right now is sort of grounded ourselves in why it's important to us, what skills we can bring to the table as a council, and how we can make an impact. Now, if we can, I'd like to take a little bit of a dive down and look at some of the data behind it, as well as then thinking about how do we craft that mission and vision for the state, or at least our perspective on that. And so I think that it's always good to sort of ground us in what many of us have talked about, which are jobs. And we don't look at just jobs, but we look at the quality of those jobs as well. I think over the last 6 years, especially, we have really harped on what kinds of jobs is it going to bring to the community, and are those quality jobs? And this board has been rock solid in your spine of taking the heat and being strong when it comes to projects and making sure that they represent jobs, because jobs are a really key element to many of the things we're talking about. And as you look at the curves for jobs in Wyoming, and we did a little curve fitting there, so you can kind of see, but it's just not growing like we would expect it to be. And we are seeing some leveling off or even some decline in both the total jobs that are available in Wyoming, as well as that median household income. And I think we can all recognize that for a long time, we talked a lot about how you could get a really good job in the trades in Wyoming and be making really good money. And so our median household income was pretty good. And as a result, we thought, hey, things are going all right. But you can see right here that things have flattened off quite a bit since probably that 2014, 2016 timeframe. And now it may even be on the decline. And so I think we need to pay attention to those factors. And we also need to think about some of those key elements that we talk about when we think about economic growth. And even if we were to take out that 2008 timeframe, that economic growth in 2008, because of all the natural gas, really gave us a big spike there. But even if we took that out and kind of curve fit it, you can see here that compared to neighboring states as well as the United States average, the Wyoming economy is sort of flat in growth. We were declining a little bit. Now we're sort of flat-ish, but we don't want that to be the case. We feel very strongly that it's our job to improve that and work on ways to remove those barriers for economic growth, understanding what businesses need and understanding how we can help them with policy investments and leadership. And so as we look at these things, I want us to start to think about what we really care about the most. And I think if we were to take a look at all of the words that have been said, things about future generation, whether that be kids having opportunities in the state, or even ourselves having opportunities to move about and have that career mobility in Wyoming, we can see that Wyoming is really good at exporting talent. I think there were some pretty solid metaphors there about comparing, people to commodities and then adding value to them in other places. That's exactly what's happening, and we can feel that. And so, as we understand the data about Wyoming, I don't look at all of those pieces of data and feel disheartened. I look at all of those pieces of data and feel proud that we're trying to fix that. But I also feel like the light is blinking in our face and others, and we have the authority and the acceptance that this is a problem. And so as we look at that, we want to really start to understand what is our shared vision, mission, and some of the metrics that matter to the Wyoming Business Council and the state. While we're having this discussion, our staff has already been synthesizing what we've been saying, picking out key themes, picking out ways to think about that. And we're going to continue that process over the next few slides. And so the goal will be to answer some of these prompts here in a moment and think about the mission, the vision, and our highest level metrics for the state. And we will be putting a draft together from all of the things that we're talking about today, that our board will still adopt in draft mode, that we can go out and talk with businesses around the state, organizations around the state, municipalities and counties to try to understand, is this right? Is this shared? Is this the vision that we should be operating on so that we can really get a feel for what rallies Wyoming together? Um, on that topic, I thought we would do a quick little history lesson though. And it was our local historian is Brandon Marshall because he's been around for over 20 years at the Business Council. He's been at the Business Council just as long as he hasn't been at the Business Council in his life. So what does that tell you? He is a historian, but he's been bringing up some historical pieces for us over the last few months and really kind of helping us see what's been going on at a high level. And so I thought we would just take a quick step back in time. And if you think about the late 90s and early 2000s, we were really kind of an extension of what, we were doing business recruitment. We were thinking about infrastructure. We were trying to coordinate things at a state level. That was when we very first started. And then we started to really think about what is the strategy of the Wyoming Business Council. And so in those late 2000s and maybe the early teens, if you will, we started to think about community development and Main Street. And so you might start to see some of those projects that were amenities in some communities and made a difference, but also maybe not getting to the root of the problem yet. But these are important steps in finding some of the root problems. And so then we sort of said, well, okay, maybe that's not it. Maybe we need to take a look at the diversification ideas. And how do we make sure that we're looking at that top line growth and we're looking at diversifying our economy to really buoy us in those boom and bust cycles? And so things like Endow and then the Wyoming Business Council taking some of those Endow initiatives and running forward with them, those things came about. Well, in 2020, it wasn't necessarily a change, but it was a further refinement and saying, okay, well, wait a second. We really need to make sure that we're looking at ROI. Are we getting a return on investment? And are we looking at the structural constraints to growth? And this is where we are in a lot of ways today, where we've highlighted some of these big challenges and we're asking communities to dig into the barriers to growth that they have so that we can unlock that growth at a community level and build the capacity so that communities can do these things on their own, or highlight the challenges so that we can change policy, make investments, or perform the leadership that's required to do it. And so as we look at this path, I kind of look at it in a way that we kind of broadened things for a while. At first, we were really kind of like we were the de facto economic development practitioners. Not many communities had them. We were doing that job on the ground. But then we started to really kind of see, okay, there are some challenges here at a community level. And then we started to narrow our scope to more economic diversification. And now we're really focused in on those system challenges that we see, and then therefore system solutions. And so this sort of gives us a little bit of a historical context. And what I would like all of us to do is know those things and know the path we've been on. And knowing that, where are we going to go next? And so if we think about that, I'd like to pose this question to you, and everyone should know we've probably got about 45 minutes to go through these three questions. So try to keep things tight if you can, and we'll do our best to pull this stuff together. But I'd like you to think about where or what will Wyoming look like when these challenges are solved? And can you think of examples that are happening today where we're already succeeding in those areas? And Derek, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrangle this group and keep us rolling.
Oh man. Well, thank you, Josh, for that background. I think that helps to kind of see that where it started, where it expanded to, and kind of where we've headed. Um, you know, I guess I'll start with I can start with my thoughts here and then really look forward to hearing everybody else's. To me, Wyoming looks like a place where we see a net gain in terms of our population. I share a slightly different view in regards to I agree with Mark where he says that some kids can leave, but and I agree with that. I think I think it's wonderful. I think we also need to be a place that kids who want to come from other places want to come to. Sadly, I can't point to him as an example in this meeting anymore because he got a heck of an opportunity and went somewhere else. But Vinny was a perfect example. Incredibly bright guy who came here from Brazil because he wanted to make a difference and he liked what he saw when he came here. And I think we need to not only focus on being a magnet for our own kids, but a magnet for those folks from outside the four walls of our state as well. So to me, what does it look like that we have a net gain of people and that Wyoming becomes a place where our kids are change makers. People want to come and live, be employed, and thrive. And I think we do see pockets of that happening in the state. I think we see that happening, you know, parts of, Sheridan, parts of, Casper. There's a great little entrepreneur eco space going on in Casper. Like there's good small little pockets of it everywhere. Um, but just needing to continue that and show that we have more to offer. Ryan, I'm going to call on you first because we had connection problems and you were out on the first two rounds of questioning, so you get to come in hot on the third.
Thank you, Derek. What will Wyoming look like when these challenges are solved? I think Wyoming will be a much kinder place that's accepting and willing to think bigger. I think we get trapped in the notion that we have to be scared of boom and bust cycles because all we have is a boom and bust driven economy. And the sooner we realize that if we grow and have other opportunities, the better off we're all going to be. I think then we can think bigger. We can be much more creative. We don't have to live scared. I think a lot of folks in our state live scared, and it shows. They hoard, they protect what they have, and they're jealous of those that have even a little bit more than them. And I think the psychology of prosperity would do us all a lot of good, and it would make this place a lot more exciting for people to want to stay and move to. So I think we are seeing examples. I think Senator Kinski, from his time in the mayor's chair in Sheridan, initiated in Sheridan. You see it on Main Street there. You see it in the business parks that are just now being filled. You see it in Cheyenne with business parks that are being filled up and opportunities starting to grow from those. But that started now 40 years ago in Cheyenne. So it takes time, but we're starting to see some of those early efforts pay off. Certainly Casper the same way. So there are glimmers, and I think it's exciting to think about what a whole state that has that opportunity could look like.
Thank you, Ryan. Your comment around Sheridan made me also think if you look on a smaller scale of our main streets and you see that you start to lower those vacancy rates and you start to see new businesses and new ideas, the community that gets created and the energy it spins up. That's a great way to think of it, is release the shackles of fear due to the boom bust. And I like the idea of a kinder, more accepting place myself. Hey, thank you, Bruce.
You're just looking for somebody, right? I think what do I think this, what can happen here? One of the things that we have to do is we have to find the right person or right people that want to live in this state. I mean, this past couple days have been a prime example why some people don't want to live in Wyoming, right? And the other thing is I think we have to look for companies and businesses that aren't in a silo. Like, if you take a look, and I'm a prime example. I mean, I was in the oil and gas and the coal industry, and when it went in the dumpers, I had to diversify and be more of a chameleon and change things around, which we have. And we need to look at companies, and I'm trying to think. I was at the governor's conference, the energy conference here a couple of weeks ago, and Ryan was there, and there was a company there that, I mean, he's doing stuff for this aerospace industry. He's diversified, but he's in Wyoming, but he's also away from Wyoming. So I think that the lifestyle of Wyoming is really an amazing thing to have. And I think it can attract the right kind of people. Um, but I think that we need to look at something other than energy in Wyoming. You know, I know right now, obviously we all know that these data centers are the hot topic, but they're not so hot when you start talking to people. And I don't think that's the diversity that we need in Wyoming right now. We need them, but I don't know. I just think that we have to really create well-paying jobs that and find the people that want to live in rural Wyoming. Even like, and I think it was Beth or somebody said that even if we doubled in size, even if we got to 1 million people in our state, you'd never know it. So, um, I'm just babbling, just to babble, just to make you feel good, Derek, that I had something to say.
Hey, I appreciate it. If for nothing other than the silos comment, I think that's important. We have to get people who are willing to break out of that silos of thought. So we'll start with Randy first and then go to Jason.
So I just wanted to just one thought, I guess, tied to what would this look like if the problems were solved. So I think we have to be realistic here. The problems are never going to be solved. But we will make progress and we will go forward and things will improve, but that will inevitably create other problems that we can deal with down the road, which I'm very excited to do. But but those problems are not going to go away. But one thing that will change when I think we've succeeded will be that we will have choices. So in particular, job choices. So it would be amazing, like the future that I dream of is, one industry has some kind of struggle, and then those folks who get laid off will have an alternative that they can turn to within the walls of our state, which would be amazing. And so I guess in my mind, that counts as we've succeeded.
Absolutely, Randy. Absolutely. Jason?
I think what will Wyoming look like when the challenges are solved? I agree with Randy. I think that there's going to be an evolving opportunity or evolving set of challenges. But I think if you look at any of our neighboring states, you can see what it could look like. I think the difference would be is I hope that there's a very Wyoming-esque spin to it, that we maintain all of the things that we love about Wyoming, whether it be the people, the ethics, the way that we interact with people, the way that we rally with each other, the way that we support each other, all those things. I think it can be done just with our own spin on it because we different. We're different. We operate different, and that's a good thing. And I do think that there are examples of this that are happening throughout the state, and I think Sheridan's one of those examples that come to mind.
For sure. And as we're talking, I thought of one other example I want to keep in mind is our small communities. I look at, Upton and Newcastle. Those are two communities that are working really hard and maintaining that idea of what's our and what's our resolve as a small town? Who are we? But how do we continue to support our folks so people don't have to leave? To Cassie's point earlier, it's important to remember bigger towns and smaller towns, and we've got great examples of both. Beth.
One of the things that just kind of tagging off of what Ryan said, with kind of a scarcity mentality is I think it'll look like we have a more diversified tax base. We have a number of challenges right now, to our tax base that kind of put us in that scarcity mentality. We've got a demographics issue where we have more older folks moving in and staying than younger, contributing to the tax base. We are going backwards in terms of property tax base. Um, uh, and I think that is, we're starting to really see what the impact of that is. You go to another state and you see trail systems and you see amenities that we simply don't have access to in Wyoming because of our tax base. And so I think we've got a number of challenges on that front. In terms of examples of where this is happening, I do think there are some bright spots. Casper approved a sixth cent for the first time ever in 2024. And that will be because we've had the revenues that we needed, that will be the fully funded in the next couple of weeks to a month probably. And that's really exciting. And we've been able to do some really good community projects because of that. So I think there are some bright spots. And we've got to be able to communicate that the 6 cent goes away and things like that. But also kind of work toward shoring up a diversification in other areas.
And interesting the tangled web it all comes together, right? If we want amenities, we want these things, but if we can diversify it, then it makes it more accessible. Any other thoughts?
Hey, Derek, would it be
Yeah,
okay if I added something in?
absolutely, Josh. I've kind of been surprised you haven't so far.
Well, I've been listening a bunch, and I want to just talk about a couple things I heard, and maybe just use some other words for it, and then my team will make it better. But this idea of mobility within the job market and the workforce, having options and being able to be mobile, that is a really challenging thing for all of us, and it creates that scarcity mindset because we don't have the opportunities that you might have when you live in a more populated area. And that changes the calculus for everyone. And that scarcity mindset, and this is, I think, what Beth is touching on, and Ryan mentioned too, because of the way our revenue structure is set up, we think about things as expenditures with our revenue rather than investments. Because the money that we use in revenue is spent and it doesn't generate more. And so when you spend money and it doesn't generate more, it goes away. But if you could be in an abundant system where those revenues were spent and they created more revenues, we would unleash, I think we would unleash much more potential at our local level within our business community. We would really unlock that because the system would be set for success, not for spending. And I think that's a really key thing. And I think that's what it would look like, is it would look like the system mimics the abundance that we want to see. And I think it's possible to do that.
Solid point. Jason, I think you'd raised your hand and then it came back down. You good? Okay. Anybody else on this one in terms of what it looks like? Because this is kind of an important one because it really does aim towards where we had that vision. Yeah, Melissa.
Yeah, I'll just add in and kind of tack on to what everybody else has said, including Josh. When Rocky Mountain Power leadership came to visit us last week, a couple weeks ago, can't keep track of time, there was a bit of a misnomer that Sweetwater County has been recruiting businesses, and that's the only way that we've been talking to businesses. But the fact is, we have a lot of businesses that contact Sweetwater County and the area that want to come into the area. But then we have some foundational barriers that prevent them from coming in. So, like Josh has said, with investment, we could open up some of those supply chains that are just naturally coming our way. But without investment, our hands are tied, we're bound, we can't do anything. And that does lead back to the tax structure, the tax base, what funding do we have? Data centers, I'll jump on that bit of a bandwagon again. They're not all created equally. Data centers have different processes for what they do. Closed loop systems using propylene glycols, completely different than, oh, all of our groundwater is going to disappear and we're in a water shortage. So I think that we do need to educate ourselves about the businesses that are looking to come in. There are some that are probably bad, but there's also a good, better, and best. We need to be able to open ourselves up to those businesses. In my mind, the shared vision for Wyoming and what it looks like is that we are all open for business everywhere to some degree. We've opened up and alleviated those barriers that we all face. We're better able to communicate as regions and counties to one another. This is the problem we faced. What did you do to solve that problem? But I don't know that we communicate with each other enough now to open up the discussions on our limited water resources or how we don't use water for certain things and the limited use of energy. Energy is a big constraint, not just for different communities in Wyoming, but Wyoming as a whole and the nation and the globe. It's not just a Wyoming problem, but where do we learn from each other to solve the problems?
Absolutely. And good point about being that central point of communication. I think that's something that we as an agency do well on topics of bringing people together. So that's a great point. Yeah, let's go with Sarah and then Mark.
Thanks, Derek. Just a couple thoughts. I mean, I think that, I think what Wyoming would look like if we solved our challenges would be we have local capacity for economic development. And there's a system in place that continues to build local capacity because I think it was Randy who had mentioned, like we fix our problems, we'll get new ones. And so we have to keep developing our communities to be able to tackle the new challenges and have a mindset and a real know-how on how to do that. I think Mr. Kinski mentioned jobs, jobs, jobs. I think that diversity of jobs and the choice of jobs, we have strong primary jobs. And we'd have a diversified tax base that addresses a lot of the challenges that you all are talking about. And I think that we have a mindset, that there's an agreed upon mindset about what economic development is, what the state's role in that is, what the locals' role is, and how that all comes to, together to drive that economic engine that, continues to fuel Wyoming's prosperity. But I think, that basic level of economic development, what the inputs are, what the outputs are, would, I think, help a lot with that shared understanding, especially related to the time it takes for economic growth. And I think, in the governor's office, I spent a lot of time working on the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. And I do think that's a really nice example of the way a problem was identified, a root problem. Like, we don't have the workforce to meet the growing demands of businesses. And that is future looking for 10 years. It's metric driven, it's relational driven, and it created a systemic change that allows for community colleges, University of Wyoming, state partners like Business Council and Workforce Development. Now they have a framework and a system, and it's not just about the jobs that we're training folks for today. The community colleges and all education has a system now of anticipating business needs that they can train up for. And so yeah, just a few thoughts from me there. Thank you.
No, that's great. And I like the addition that's new there of what's the system that's put in place to tackle it in the future. Because, yeah, that point of there's always going to be a problem. How are we going to tackle it? Okay, let's go with Mark and then Dave.
I was just going to support everything Sarah said. And the other thing I would add is there'd be business certainty, because problem with Wyoming right now is if you're a business, you look at it and it's like the people who are going to spend $1 billion or $2 billion, they know that the model we have isn't really sustainable, and they don't want to be the next group that's going to pay all the taxes like the mineral industry. And so until there's a little bit of certainty, it's the same thing too with the governor talks about like Club No. Like when you come to Wyoming, you want to be able to get your building built. You want to be able to get your permits pulled.
Absolutely. Dave, I know you had your hand raised, but I just lost you. I don't know if you had something to say or
Well,
if
no, I once you
okay.
mentioned my name, I pulled my hand down so you didn't have to be bothered by it. I wanted to circle back to something that Ryan said, which is in terms of the kind of place that Wyoming would be, and he talked about it, a much more tolerant place, a much more accepting place, peaceful, I think maybe. But it reminded me of the old adage that when money troubles walk in the door, love flies out the window. The opposite is true. Prosperity solves a host of ills, and the key to prosperity is diversification. Just as simple as that. When your entire economy depends upon energy and tourism, you don't have a portfolio of businesses. But we all are familiar with portfolio theory. The more investments you have, then all the busts and booms of the individual investments even out, and overall you do better. And that's one of the reasons that we went after manufacturing so hard in Sheridan. We've got ag, we've got tourism, we've got coal. It's in decline. But these consultants identified manufacturing as a high profile target for us because we already had some nascent manufacturing industries there. The conditions existed, so let's go all in on that one. And so that adds what's needed to really try to even out some of the ups and downs. So I think the Wyoming of the future is going to be a much more diversified place, and as a consequence, a much more prosperous economy. I did want to circle back just a little bit, Josh. When you gave sort of that history of the business council, I got a little bit lost because my recollection is the consultants, and consultants get a bad name, but the consultants that we had in Sheridan were so good because everything that we've talked about here today, folks, they took us through. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your barriers? What are your obstacles? What are your funding issues? What are your challenges? What kind of industries do you have? What do you want? I mean, it was a tremendous piece of work, so much so that after a couple of years, we went and refreshed it. And none of these issues are new. And I'm going to say it again. I think the process the Business Council historically has had of having the regional advisors telling these communities, if you're ready, if you've got a vision, we can help you, and we can help you bring in the people that can help you put that vision together. And talking about housing, infrastructure, all of those issues end up going into what is the right plan for your community. It's just 101. I don't know that there's anything new under the sun. I'll say I think the course that we're on with these regional reps is a great course. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave, and thank you all. Thank you all for your thoughts around that. I think even though those are kind of some diverse thoughts and seem like they might be a little across the board, there's some really central through lines there. And I think by pulling that together, we'll know, to Josh's next point, how we'll be able to see that we've accomplished these things and really drive towards where are we head as an organization and how do we get a direct measure of that. So, Josh, please take it away.
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, you did a pretty good job. I think, we've kind of talked about the things that we think are important or what the future will look like. One of the things that I'd like to hear from everyone is, what do we track, or what are the indicators that say we got there? And there's not necessarily a right answer right here, but I think if we could all start talking through it, we'll get somewhere.
I mean, I'll throw one in right now just because it seems like it's a common point would be in terms of net population growth among and let's look at it by demographics and in particular looking at the younger demographics, the immediate post-college, you know, however that breaks out. Um, you know, maybe immediate post-college through 40 growth in that demographic.
And real quick, as I mentioned, we are taking notes behind the scenes with everything folks are saying. So we're collecting this information. We'll be able to put it into something useful. So just go ahead and keep on talking, everybody.
Mr. Metric, there we go. You know who I'm talking about. What do you think?
Oh, well, what I would say is from JAC, we actually, some of our partner folks that were there laid out some amazing metrics. And I know that there's metrics that we could look at that we can't affect. But I think the thing that I would say is they lead to the picture of what our economy looks like. And so population density is one of them. I agree with you, Derek. Birth, death rates, those are some of those. How many graduates we have that are in state, that stay in state versus that migrate out. I think we could go through a whole host of metrics that speak to how our economy is doing that we may not even be able to impact. But it gives us a barometer of where we're at. And then if we start seeing movements or glitches or outliers to any of those metrics, can we link those back to the efforts that are being made by us? And so I think that there's those non-direct related metrics that we should be watching, and a lot of those were laid out in JAC very well. But then there are the direct ones, right? How many jobs are we creating? What are the dollars that we're being spent on? How much revenue is being generated in the state? We could go on and on. So
No, and that's a good point, Jason. There's a lot of discussion around that JC that I think we can glean from for sure. Cassie.
You've probably heard me rant about this before, and I'll probably continue, but I think some of those non-direct metrics we could track is mental health suicide deaths. I think when people have good jobs and there's stabilization, they don't die by suicide as frequently. When they have access to medical care and mental health care, they don't die by suicide. I think we could also track things like recidivism and criminal justice incarceration rates, and that would be tied in as well.
That's good points, Cassie. Plus, you're making me remember how to spell recidivism, so thank you for that. Mark.
I'd add students. I don't know how you track it, but I'd add students who leave with a certificate, finish K-12 education with some sort of certificate for employment, and then a demographic that is what percentage of youth are here remain in Wyoming within 5 years, remain within 10. And then I think that some of those ones they may not be directly influenced by or you may not be able to take direct credit for them, but I think that if your work is doing good things, you're going to see it through population and the rest of them. But the problem with some of those like tax revenue collected is until we have a conversation on tax, the Wyoming method right now is every person you add makes the whole bigger because nobody pays their share. So it's like it's kind of a perverse incentive. We need to diversify because it's what's right for our people. You look in terms of the budget and you look in terms of revenue, some of that looks differently. And I think that goes back to addressing also the ability of local government to tax and take care of its infrastructure, offer the kind of services people want. And another one of the metrics that I would add is whether the legislative changes the board wants get made. I think we bring our own legislative proposals.
That's a good point, Mark. I appreciate the outside of the box thinking about that a little bit too. We're looking at metrics in terms of people, but what are other things that we can measure and other changes we can measure? I think that's good. I had one thought, Mark, to add to yours before I lose it, and then on to you, Randy. From your comment before about how do we create the pathways for people to come back? Maybe it's around, you know, do we see an increase of folks who left the state at, 22? Do they start coming back in their 30s? And have we made that path easier? So maybe that's one to stick in the banks too. Thanks for your patience, Randy. So I'm going to go with you first, and then we'll go on to Bruce.
Okay, well, I just have a question. Is there a method or something already in place so that we can track those people metrics? I'm not aware of, I don't fill out a survey every other year saying how many people live in my household. So how would we track that if not for this census, which is a decade apart? Just curious if anyone knows the answer.
Josh, I would have to defer to you or maybe Sarah or someone who might have a knowledge of how we've pulled this data statistically that we use in these reports in the past.
So really quickly, what I might say, just for the sake of this discussion, is let's not necessarily limit it to what we can do this moment and think about what might indicate it, because that might be an area where we sort of exercise some policy, we lean on some policies, or we find a way to do that. Just I think from a brainstorming perspective, it might be easier that way to not get tripped on what's actually possible yet. Does that help? Did I dodge that enough or?
Yeah, that was terrible. But okay. Just kidding, Josh.
I appreciate the blunt honesty, Randy. I mean, I appreciate it. Sarah, I saw you have your hand raised. Was that kind of in relation to that question?
Yeah, Derek. So, Josh is right. I would encourage everybody to just think about what would actually indicate if we're accomplishing the vision or not, at this point. But I will say that there are ways of measuring that at a more on a more frequent basis. And we've done that in several different ways before. So don't let it limit you, as you're brainstorming today.
So thanks, Sarah. Bruce.
Well, here we go again. I guess if you want to be able to find out if we've accomplished what we're looking for, don't you think we should start with some type of matrix? Because you guys talk about matrix and fish bones and all this other stuff, but shouldn't we be asking our youth what it would take to keep you here? And if we had this list, then we could maybe work off of or something like that, and then ask them again, what would it take to bring you back? If you left, what would it take to bring you back? If you're going to measure what we are trying to do to build the economics of Wyoming, we need to really find out why these guys are leaving. Is it because there's no work? I don't know. I think that you have to ask people why they're leaving. Are they leaving because our unemployment is not very big in Wyoming? I mean, if you want to work, you can work here. And depending on what you want to do, anything from engineering to being a doctor, you can come to Wyoming and work. So why are they leaving? Why are they not coming back? Maybe I'm all wet here, but there's got to be a reason. I know why my kids aren't here. So maybe that's something that we need to think about and ask that question.
That's a good question to ask and to go to and ask, what would it take, and then measure those things. I would counter your last point around jobs and people staying here, and this is just because we've heard it from a couple different communities, that in Wyoming, we have a very real problem where if people can't find the job that they want or they get laid off from one, as opposed to staying in Wyoming and looking for another one, they're going to another state to go chase it down. So our numbers don't always track going, oh, well, we've got a higher unemployment rate because of this. But you don't have an unemployment rate because, Mark, to use your example from the coal mines, they all packed up in U-Haul trucks and left town. So there wasn't an unemployment rate because there weren't people left to be unemployed. So it's kind of a weird balance in how we track that and how we balance that. Yet another Wyoming problem, but one we can figure out and figure out how to track it and how to better follow it. Ryan.
So I won't go on too long. My my hokey side is to look at things through the lens of why would people stay, and to me that centers on, are you content? Are you happy with where you're at? And I don't know, each of your individual stories, but in the hokey side of things, there's actually a World Happiness Index that measures 6 different things, and it starts with real GDP per capita, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and perceptions of corruption. And while I'm not exactly excited to link up with an entity like the United Nations, who came up with this a long time ago, I do think that those 6 things are pretty interesting, and I'd be really curious to see how Wyoming compares to other states that are growing, and to see if they have any sort of tie to maybe why we're not compared to our neighbor states.
That's a good one. I remember reading about that happiness index, and there's a lot of good information in there. I think though we run into some difficult things like Beth had talked about earlier in terms of how do we add some of those amenities just because our tax structure isn't necessarily built for it. But again, right? This is high level. So, any other thoughts before I pass it to you, Mr. Durrell? Yeah, Melissa. Oh,
Yeah.
Melissa, Dave, and then we'll go to Josh.
Okay. I think we've been asking these questions for a long time, and I do think they're the same answers. They fit into those categories that Ryan just said. There's not enough opportunity here for kids. If they want to do such and such to earn their living, well, how do they do that here? It's just not always where their here is. I think young people also, generally speaking, want to meet a spouse or a partner. Are they going to find them in Wyoming? Lifestyle. Are there as many activities for them to participate in and do here? That's why they're drawn to the bigger cities. As much as their parents don't want to become the big city, a lot of our youth are drawn to the big city because of all that they have, all that the big city has to offer. Um, Let me swing back to metrics on, I think somebody mentioned certificates earned in schools, high schools, collegiate. Well, Wyoming Department of Education collects data on CTE certificates that are earned at the high school level. It's required for the Perkins grant that their CTE concentrators earn certificates. So a lot of students are earning multiple certificates. Work-based learning programs has also become a part of the Perkins grant and the RIDE program. So a lot of the data that you seek, I think it's available and it's out there. But the bottom line is, how do we move the needle on the very, very foundational things to get people to want to stay? Thanks.
Absolutely. And appreciate the bringing that up with the Perkins through the DOE. I think things like that are important as we're looking at how do we find this information. Yeah, Dave. And then we'll go to Josh.
We're operating in the abstract, but I wonder if at some point staff might go out and take a look at what sorts of measures are used, in other states, in other contexts. There's people, wise guys that have studied this stuff that may have some measures. I liked what Ryan mentioned. There's some standardized kind of measures there. The one that I would look at would be the diversification of the economy, of the jobs. As I've gotten a report from time to time on Sheridan that shows how many jobs in ag, tourism, manufacturing, et cetera. to say, are we getting some diversification in there, or are we still primarily dependent upon three different sectors? So that's a ready measure. I don't know whether it comes from the Department of Employment, um, from the state of Wyoming, or whether it comes from the Business Council, but that's one rough and ready measure. Unemployment, of course, being another one. And as to attitudinal surveys, I like the idea of an attitudinal survey. You know, the classic one in polling, at least in a political context, is the classic question is, do you feel things are going the right way or the wrong way? Sounds like duh, but in fact, when you track that over time, it gives you a real good feel. So maybe it's the same sort of thing. Do you feel there's good opportunity for yourself and your children in Wyoming or not? Or another common question is, do you think that your children can be looking forward to a higher standard of living than you've enjoyed in Wyoming? That kind of thing. So staff might be able to help us out by going out and doing a little bit of research as to some of the measures that are already out there and readily recognized, and that actually might be able to help us compare ourselves or benchmark ourselves with other states. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thanks for those thoughts, Dave. And I think perfect segue back over to you, Josh. I know we've done some thinking and some talking in regards to other states. In particular, I'd say one that we've kind of looked at is North Dakota as being one that would be, somewhat analogous that we could start to compare and get thoughts from. But what do you think, Josh? Where do we want to head next?
Well, we're gonna talk about all of those things. So we'll talk about so first, Dave, the index that you're talking about is called the Hackman Index. It's spelled HACHMAN. That tells a state's diversity of its economy. We are not the best, and you can imagine where we might be. But what I can tell you is that that is one economic indicator. I also mentioned that, Sarah was talking about how do we talk about the ability for our idea. And I think this might not be there for a while, but I think we've got to look far into the future. I would say that the amount of money that the state puts into a community going down and maybe being less of its revenue that from the state and more of it from internally would be a good indicator of a state building or a community building its own local capacity. So I would say if we could be a smaller portion of every deal that goes on in BRC, that's a good indicator. It may not happen for a while, but that would be one. And with that, I'm going to jump to the next slide, which is what is our job in this? Because it turns out that we've talked about a lot of things, and when you are quote unquote in charge of the economy in the state, that's a lot. So what's our job in all of this?
Well, I'll give my three bullet points, and I want to hear everybody else's. One of them is they all center around providing the tools and support. I don't think it's the job of the business council to do the work, but it is to provide the tools and support to help remove hurdles, expand opportunities, and think outside the box through expertise and evaluation. I know that captures a lot, but I think there's a lot of things our staff already does. So kind of thinking of how do we draw bigger boxes for the problems now and the problems of the future. Bruce, I'm seeing your head move around. Oh, yep. What do you know?
Well, if I can figure out how to turn my computer stuff on and off. I think the thing that our job is right now is how communities and the state build the infrastructure to support everything we're talking about. I mean, I hate to say this, and don't get mad, but my dad used to say shit in one hand and want in the other and see which one gets full first. And our problem is here, guys, is a lot of it is infrastructure to change the focus of what we're doing. I mean, We'd all love to have, NVIDIA come to Wyoming, but do we have the infrastructure to support that? And, one of the things that we did talk about, and I'm sure that Melissa will remember this, I kind of put the Rocky Mountain Power people on their heels because I asked them for areas of capacity. Where do you have areas of capacity for infrastructure? And we will build the rest around that. And they kind of just had deer in the headlights. They really couldn't say, we can give you places that we have the infrastructure to move forward. And without that, we can get water. Well, if it rains, we can get water. Um, and we can get sewer and we can get those kind of things to places. But the one thing that we don't have is Rocky Mountain Power giving us the infrastructure for that. So I guess my biggest thing is we need to help develop the infrastructure. And don't get me wrong, we still need to do everything else we do, but without infrastructure, we're just going to Colorado and smoking something funny.
So Bruce, I've got a follow-up question or two, I guess, to that.
Sure.
When you're talking about infrastructure, are you purely just talking about roads, water, sewer, power, or are you actually talking about how we help build the infrastructure of the systems to help bring these businesses to our communities?
I think kind of the latter of the two. We need to help build that infrastructure. I mean, I don't think that, I have a personal feeling about Rocky Mountain Power, and all you got to do is live in Rollins this past couple of days, and you'd have the same feeling. They're holding us back. I mean, we have a couple tomorrow that we're going to talk about helping build infrastructure in a couple small communities, and I don't think Slib after the Cheyenne thing will say no, but um, those are the kinds of things that we need to help build. But we also need to target areas in the state that we can help build that. And again, that's my pipe dream.
For sure. Melissa.
Yeah, I think just to expand the conversation that Bruce has brought forward, because I do agree with a lot of what he said, but talking about that maybe on a deeper level, I think it's just understanding what those foundational barriers are in your community. I actually completely understand why Rocky Mountain Power is not wanting to invest and build out in certain areas. And I'll use my own company that I worked for a while, Carbon Capture Inc. They asked for a whole heck of a lot of power. They wanted to go in an area where nothing else was. Had Rocky Mountain Power invested billions of dollars in that area to build them out, and then they just disappeared. They couldn't come in. Rocky Mountain Power is a business still. They have to make wise economic business decisions. So my thoughts toward Rocky Mountain Power is I just want to understand what they can and cannot do so that we know what we should do moving forward. Who should we try and connect with to supply power in other ways? I want to see Rocky Mountain Power stay in business because they give me the power to my house every single day. So I don't want them to make unwise business decisions moving forward. I want them to do what works best for them as well. Now, the question, Derek, do I think that we should invest heavily in providing power so that businesses can come to the county? I think that's a conversation that still needs to be developed. I don't think we have that kind of money, but I think we need to know what the viable pathways are for businesses to come. A lot of the businesses that would like to come to the area, they have deep pocket funding from global investors. But do we, at a local level, need to be able to guide and direct them so that they know what paths they should take moving forward? A lot of startup companies have a limited amount of money for a limited amount of time. If they can't see a path forward in one state, they'll move to another state. Sometimes they find there's still a barrier in that state. I've seen that happen before too because they don't even understand what the problem is. But I think what our goal should be for the Wyoming Business Council and at a local level is to understand what our problems are and be able to coach and advise those businesses that want to come into the community better because we've already done some of the troubleshooting for them. That's it for now.
That's good. And I think that that coaching and advising role is taken well, right? It isn't just in regards to infrastructure, it's in regards to all of this and
Yeah.
expanding what we're already doing. Mr. Lance.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question about infrastructure? I think you asked it, sort of in a definitional um, sense. I'm curious, maybe specifically from Dave's perspective as a former mayor and certainly state senator most recently. Does the legislature see it as the role of the business council, and do communities see it as our role to build the infrastructure that Bruce was talking about? Because I'm torn on this question. I think what we're dealing with from what I can read and see is we've starved a lot of our local governments for so long and haven't given them an independent way to create infrastructure and to fund it, that now just because we have some money, people perceive that we're the folks that have to go fix that. And I'm concerned with Melissa's point that we don't have enough money to fix all those problems. I think we were right in our letter that we sent to the legislature last year to point out this is a $1 billion need. And I think that's been borne out by the facts. And so I'm curious about that. And then I'm also curious then if it is our job to fund infrastructure, we're going to need a lot more money. We're going to need a lot more resources. And we need pretty much an entirely different staff. And if that's the case, then I think we need to think about a fairly healthy change to our statute books. But Dave, I'd be really interested in your thoughts and perspectives on how communities in the legislature view our job.
But Ryan, I hate to speak on behalf of the legislature. You've worked with them enough to know that it's 90, now 93 different voices. I have to precede this by saying that I was part of a group of dissidents when I was mayor within the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. And our thing was, we felt there was too much. I've got to be careful how I say this. That when WHAM came and said, you've got to guarantee our budgets and you have to rebuild our infrastructure, we're part of a group that says, God, how unrealistic are you? I mean, the state of Wyoming can't do that for itself. It can't guarantee its revenue, and look at all the infrastructure needs the state has. So how do you think the state's going to come in and just lavish all that money on you? But here's some questions for the local governments. Have you assessed your fifth penny? Have you assessed your sixth penny? Did you know they have a seventh penny they can assess? Have they maxed out on their mill levy? The state set aside, and I was a positive vote for that, $200 million for infrastructure for roads and $200 million for other infrastructure. 25-year loan, 2.5%. You know how many people took advantage of that? Sheridan did, because it was a good deal. There were a couple other communities. People want free money and they want lots of it. One of the foundational memories I have, it was my very first SLIB meeting, Ryan, you were there, is when Friedenthal was governor and they had all that money and we were in that Hirschler meeting room, remember? And it was jammed. It was standing room only. And this one guy from some community comes up and says, you've got to give us money to fix our water system. And Friedenthal, I'll do my best Dave Friedenthal imitation. He says, well, I have to understand here something, Mr. Mayor. I've got a staff committee report here that says your water rates are amongst the lowest in the state. Now tell me why we would give you a grant and push you ahead of the front of the line of all these other people. And he says, well, you can't ask us to vote to raise our rates. People would get mad. And he says, so that's why I've got to give you this grant ahead of everybody else, because you can't stand for a tough vote. I mean, a lot of these issues, the communities just have to face up to it. But we have been so rich for so long that people are just addicted to the money. And if you didn't have the money and somebody else had it, well, you were at SLIB, you had the money. They were all lined up there. And we used to have what was that fund of money? It was about 30 or 50 million bucks that the big five had to hand out.
Mineral
It
royalty grants.
MRG money. And as that went down, then the business council, well, we can go over there and say it's economic development, get a water and sewer grant. Some of it genuinely is economic development. Some of it genuinely is. Some of it is we're just looking for a water and sewer grant. And so I don't think the infrastructure problem is ours to solve. I think that's too big a mandate. And we are not in charge of the economy of the state of Wyoming. We are in charge of harnessing resources when there is a local community that has figured out they've got some vision and they want to diversify or build their economy, and they've got a compelling vision about how they want to do it. We can help them build that vision, and we can help bring state resources to the table, but we can't fix all their problems for them. And I've been in so many of these discussions, Ryan, where people say, well, we can't do this until we fix the affordable housing problem, and we can't do anything until we fix all this. There's all these conditions precedent. That's not the way it works. I was in a board meeting where this guy said, we can't do any of those things. I said, wait a minute, Bob, you have a car dealership. Do you sell any perfect cars? No. I mean, do you have competitors that have some cars that are better than yours? Yes. And yet you still sell cars. I mean, you sell what you got, and you work on all these things simultaneously. You can't just say, well, we have to fix all these things before we can go out and really try to build our businesses. We have to do it all at the same time. But it has to be that we are going to be a conduit for resources. If the legislature wants to give us $100 million for infrastructure, I doubt that it's going to happen. I think that we have to stick to our program, which is we have a metric. You show me you're going to create some high paying jobs with benefits, and you rank highly. And unless you can do that, you rank low. And that's the name of the tune. It's pretty straightforward. Anyway, I got a little bit lost there, Ryan. Did I answer your question? Because
you did, Dave. I mean, part of it for me is there isn't enough money in the world to solve all these problems, right? And I think Randy mentioned it earlier that we're not going to solve them anyway, because then there's just the next set. But there are 80 billion different reasons why communities can't do something, and there are usually 2 or 3 ways to do something. And I just get increasingly frustrated that from the grant mix that we see to the barking we heard from our detractors during the session that wanted to defund us, most of that stuff we don't own as a business council. One, we don't have any actual decision making. That's the state 5. But beyond that, we couldn't control it if we wanted to. And so I just don't know, going back to our job, I think our job is to condition the environment to say we can do things. But in order to do things, you have to act for yourself. The patriarchal state isn't going to come solve your problems. We can nip around the edges, but damn it, pass a bond issue. Pass.
Right.
Get your water rates up, and then come tell us that you need something. That's how you start to sort some of this out. But tough love hasn't been popular. It's led to a lot of distraction and detraction from our friends out there in some of the entities and organizations that you mentioned in your discussion.
And just very quickly about the legislative debate, people kept saying the business council this, the business council that. I had to keep telling people in Sheridan, it's not the business council. It's the local county commission or it's the local city council. They have to sponsor the business grants. Don't get mad at the business council. They're just following a process outlined by the legislature. If there's something wrong with something that happened, go talk to your county commissioner, your local town council, because they're the ones that sponsor the grant. And that we've got to get it out of this, get people out of this belief that somehow we're running the whole deal. We're not.
That is a great point. Lots of good comments there. Yeah, Josh, I know I've got a thought, but Josh, go ahead.
Derek, if you've got something on this, let's do it. I do want to do a quick time check. This is super good commentary, and I want to make sure folks get a chance on this, but just wanted to do a quick time check too.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. I think part of to this issue of what is the business council's job, I think we have seen projects that come forth that we've approved and we've all approved that have been tied to infrastructure. But to your points, both Dave and Ryan, they're tied to what's the return on investment, what's the business that infrastructure is bringing. And I think what's tricky right now is that's almost being projected as well, the business council should cover these infrastructure improvements on projects across the state. I don't think anyone's denying that the state needs a whole hell of a lot of infrastructure work. But this also could be an opportunity for us with partners, led by partners, in my opinion, especially WHAM and those who are tied directly with the communities, to go, great, if we have this big of a need for infrastructure, then let's create a separate fund that's intended for that rather than trying to use BRC or other business council operations as a Swiss Army knife that does nothing well. That's actually make this targeted. And same with our own programs. How do we do our job by using targeted tactical tools to execute? And to that point, I guess that's all I have to say about that. So I'll hand it over to Jason.
Oh, sorry. I didn't even realize my video was off there. I apologize. I've been sitting here looking for the report. And Josh, correct me on the numbers, but I think it was in 2014, there was over $250 million handed out in funding. A big portion of that directed towards infrastructure, because there's a realization throughout the state that the infrastructure that exists is dilapidated and needs repair, right? But I think the thing that is very important to remember, to the things that Derek was just saying, Ryan has said, and I've heard Josh say several times publicly, there's a difference between building infrastructure that promotes business and growth and in-migration to expand communities, and infrastructure repairs to support what's existing. And I think we really have to put some pressure on our legislators to separate those two categories, provide funding separately for those two categories, because in my opinion, the job of the business council is to, if we're talking infrastructure specific, it's to create an environment where businesses can come in and be ready to go to work, not to replace a dilapidated street or sewer or something along those lines.
Well stated, Jason. Bruce.
So getting back to something that Dave just talked about, I think, these communities need to know what we are and what we do. And I think the communities need to know how our programs work and how we can partner up with them so they can get into this. Obviously, I've beat this one to the bush over the last 16 months. I don't think people realize the mechanics of how they get money from us. And I think that that's something that would help a bunch. I know that we've had folks, we've had, like, I know our county commissioners and stuff like that have had our folks come and talk to them about things, but I'm just not so sure that people know the mechanics of the business council for infrastructure or for anything. That's just me.
Well, fair enough. I think that's difficult, right? Because it's communication. So we've been learning that it goes both ways. We can tout it all we want. But if someone's not willing to listen, that makes it really hard to make them listen, just like it's hard to make them want it. Josh, I'm not sure if you caught Ryan's comment in the chat, but Ryan was asking if our mission is outlined at all in statute.
Let me look at our statute and I'll be able to tell you. You guys keep on, go forth. I'll comb it right now.
Just thinking about again, as we're talking legislative changes, I mean that'd always be good to know what it says as a baseline, if it even does, right? Um, what else around what is our job? It's a tricky one, I know that. I actually I'd like to ask, hold on. Sarah, I was just going to ask you a question, so I'm glad you raised your hand.
Yeah, I think from the governor's office, the governor is putting together some thoughts on what he thinks primarily the business council's role is, and so I should have that for the board. But overall, I mean, I really liked some of these concepts that we've been talking about now are very on the nose, I think. The the capacity building, the conditioning the environment, like Ryan said. I mean, the business council is primed to cultivate a space where business can thrive, communities can thrive, and they can achieve their individual goals. And I've always kind of thought about the business council as filling in where communities cannot achieve that on their own. And so that may be the last piece of funding that they might need to complete a project. It may be, that planning piece. It may be helping with business recruitment and understanding if this business is right for a community. And also, helping the communities evaluate their own infrastructure needs or other needs that they have. And so I think a lot of the conversation about local decision making and local accountability are really key here because, like we opened the meeting with, we don't want to force a community to be something that they are not, or they are not ready for, or they cannot achieve without significant support because, we want we want communities to be able to take on projects and initiatives and have that measurable growth on their own. And so the business council and the programs and tools and expertise that are offered should all help facilitate that in the end. And the program should be, dynamic in the way they can respond to the changing and growing economic environment. But it's really systemically based, I believe, because of that change. And the supports and tools will be important, but I do think, like we've talked about, there is a difference between infrastructure and infrastructure for economic development. And that is key to where we sit today, I think, too.
Thank you for that. I think that helps to know that governor perspective and that they're working on things. I like that idea where it's keying in again on what's their individual goals and what can we provide, and maybe this is paraphrasing, but what can we provide systemically rather than just from a capital perspective?
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. And I do think, I mean, and this is from my experience in the governor's office, there are a lot of businesses that are very interested in Wyoming. And the business council provides tremendous value in helping evaluate if those businesses, one, are legitimate, if they are businesses that would work with Wyoming, if they're businesses that we can support in Wyoming. And that's super key, being sort of the one-stop shop for business in Wyoming too. And there's not another entity that can do that. The business council and their expertise and their growing expertise in credentialing and economic development is super key to helping us navigate those new businesses and helping with business retention and growth within Wyoming too. That expertise is needed and valued.
Absolutely. I mean, I also, and this is kind of maybe I've been hanging out with Bert too much since I've been on this board, but that idea of what's the last mile, things like what we do with YVC, where here's our commitment letter, but if you need less money than what we're willing to commit, that's even better. or one of the projects that we did when I first came on the board, I think it was in Lyman with I think it was assisted living or nursing home that came to us for funding and hadn't really pursued any other options. So we said, go back, try again. And they did, and we were able to provide that last mile of funding gratefully, but we didn't want to be the primary funding. And I think that's a model to follow for everything we do, right? We don't want to be paying for these things alone. So Josh, I think I saw you just found it and put it into the chat. Should be the duty of the council to encourage, stimulate, and support the development and expansion of the economy of the state. Lots of concrete definitions in there.
So, Derek, the reason I asked that question, not to just interrupt and not put up my hand, is if we're a board of directors and we've all worked for boards or we've sat on boards for, and I know a commercial enterprise is different than a government enterprise, and I don't want it to come back to just strictly a return on investment sort of scenario. How would a board discern whether we are achieving this mission, and how should we look at our job to accomplish this mission? Randy, how does a bank board look at that? Jason, how does your board look at that from a commercial enterprise standpoint?
Just trying to be the gentleman and let Randy go first.
Go ahead, Jason. My brain is having to really think about that one.
I was actually just thinking about that question, Ryan, and I think it's an interesting one because as a council, I think we're in a little bit of a unique position, maybe from a commercial perspective. On a commercial perspective, you're always looking at return on investment, right? How are the dollars that are invested going to return to you, and in what time frame are they going to return to you, and are they even returning to you in the best practice or in the best times available? And then you're also evaluating opportunities based on, are there ones that could get you a return quicker than the other ones? The thing that I think is unique about us as a council is I think we have a little bit more liberty. We should always be focused on what the return is, but we also have the liberty of knowing what's just the right thing to do, or what's going to have maybe a better net effect 5 years or 10 years or something down the road, not just looking at what's the immediate return. And so as I think about that with our responsibility, how do we gauge our success? I think we have to look at some of the immediate returns. If we don't see immediate returns, then I think to some degree we are failing. But I also can think that there's things that we can look at that are positioning us for a return in the future, and securing us or positioning us as a state to be prepared for growth that we are not experiencing today.
I wouldn't add much, Jason, but just to just keep in mind that, if you translate it back to like the bank board scenario, I do think we tend to have to be in the mindset of we take full responsibility. So we're going to jump in and we're going to do it all the way. We're not going to just kind of sit back and hope things work out. We're going to take some proactive measures and not just hope it works out. You know what I mean? We'll take it by the reins and go. I think we get stuck in a mindset sometimes of like, well, this will work out in the long run, or when my term is up, maybe things will be different. I think if you go at it with a full responsibility look, then you'll be a lot more successful.
Can I restate that, Randy? Is that okay? maybe
Yeah, do
then
whatever you want.
rather than looking at it from a responsibility, I guess what I'm hearing you say is an ownership, that we as a board, we're owning whatever the decisions and things that we're voting are, and that we do feel like that those are the best decisions to move economic growth throughout the state. Is that okay, Randy? Am I correct?
Yes, thank you. I was having a hard time spitting it out, so thanks.
I think those are great points. And I mean, the way I'm hearing it when you're saying it too is kind of how we look at investments as people, and I guess as the business council and how Bert looks at them too, of we're making the best possible decision. We're owning the decision that we're making today, realizing that not every decision is going to be able to be a home run and that sometimes we're going to strike out. But if we keep taking swings, we keep making the best decisions with the information we have, as a net, we're going to see progress. To me, that's part of that ownership, right? Is so we own the success, but we also have to own the failure. And I know that gets a little trickier because we are dealing with a certain, this isn't a fully private entity, right? Or a fully privately held bank. This is, governmental funds. So it's a little different. That changes the risk aversion layer. But also, doing the best we can to make a decision with the information we have today, not waiting for 100% certainty. Yeah, Mark, sorry, you've probably had your hand up and I totally missed it till just now.
I want to add something because we're talking about like the entities and the local governments and all the things that are needing to happen. And I don't want to lose track of there are some local government investments that need to be taken care of. And whether those happen through MRGs or whether those happen through the business council or whether those happen somewhere, those need to be taken because with 8 mills and 12 mills, you don't have the money. And going to the voters every time to bond stuff is just impossible. Like it's the cost, the government can't actually do the lobbying under Wyoming law. You can't do any of the rest of it. So getting those through is incredibly difficult. And there is not a group of people in any small town that's willing to put forward $40,000 to promote a bond for water and sewer. Like it's just not going to happen. So with that said, what I would like though is like I think that what I liked was Ryan mentioned it a couple of meetings ago when he said, if you're going to give us decision making and you're going to blame us, then give us authority to make the decision. It's like that with those grants or like the one that went to SLIB for the housing. I don't think there is a bad thing in having an entity that is based with people who are not elected, who are appointed, that go through a rigorous confirmation process, making decisions as opposed to when it gets to SLIB and it becomes a political football. Like it would be nice if there was a place that local government could say, we've got our rates here. They're the highest in the state. We did a sixth penny to set aside some of it for cap tax. We did this, we did this, we did this, and we can't fill the gap. Can we come to you, the business council? And the business council could then look at it as a business decision as opposed to a political decision, which is what it is at SLIB. And we could say yes or no. Now, that doesn't mean that the legislature couldn't create a framework to incentivize people to do the right thing. So like, if I were looking at it, I would go, there's this huge infrastructure deficit in Wyoming because nobody's been able to take care of it with 8 or 12 mills, which is what you should be able to do in your operations. The legislature did the consensus money again this year. I think that's great. What if there was a process that said, if it's for infrastructure and it meets these categories, you can go to the business council. If you use consensus money, receive a 50% match. Or something like give those local governments the opportunities to do the right thing, to go to the voters and say, like, if we do this, we can get this done with match money. And that's where I go, like, I don't know if business council is the right term. Maybe we're more like economic development or maybe we're something else. But there should be a group somewhere. It would be beneficial if it were not a political process. And maybe that just gets housed in the governor's office. Maybe that gets housed with us. Maybe that gets housed with somewhere. But the SLIB process, the way it is right now, doesn't work. And anyways, that's what I've got.
Oh, I think that that last statement's a good enough one to close it out, Mark, in terms of it just doesn't work, period. So, and I think really where the struggle is and where this conversation seems like it's circling back and forth and where it has been bouncing forth is it the role of the business council to be doing infrastructure projects in the communities? I think that's where a lot of this comes back to. And I think personally they're important projects, but unless it's a business project, unless it's a business specific project, I don't see where that falls in the business council. But kind of, I guess, continuing that mission conversation, are there any more thoughts around that? Any more thoughts of how we would achieve or measure how we're lining it up against this mission? Yeah, Melissa.
Yeah, maybe not so many answers, but an analysis. That mission statement seems to be an equation. I had the opportunity to talk to one of our legislators lately, and the notion was that the Wyoming Business Council is on the chopping block because they have not stimulated GDP. GDP has fallen. So that's an outcome of a math equation. What does it equal? GDP. But really, the mission statement itself deals with the inputs of the equation, and we're a part of the equation. We are not held to be the end all of the equation. And I think it's important to understand the landscape in which you operate, not just the bottom line of GDP has not grown.
I mean, and lies, lies and statistics, right? I mean, it's all the way that you look at GDP. Why did it fall? Primarily outside of our control because it's tied to the extractive industries. But if that's the number you're looking at, Melissa, your point's 100% right and well taken, that if that's what it's looking like, if that's what you're looking at, what decreases, you're the business council, you shouldn't let this happen.
And so as we create our metrics, I want to be really targeted and focused on what metrics we even suggest for the business council, realizing what factors can we control and have an impact on, and what factors can we not.
Absolutely. Kind of just flipping through cameras, looking at everybody. Looks like some deep thoughts, some blank stares, and a little bit of things in the middle. Um, I guess, Josh, I know you said time check, and then we just kept kind of blowing through it, but I think it was a great conversation. Um, where do we want to, where would you like to continue on this in terms of direction and able to pull some of this information together with staff? What are your thoughts? I guess I'd ask also other board members, what are your thoughts before continuing into at least a little bit of that economic development 101 conversation we wanted to have?
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, I think the Economic Development 101 talk might need to take to be another time. I think
Okay.
there's plenty to talk about there. I think it's good information, but really where we got today is so again, our team is behind the scenes gathering the thoughts that all of us have. If it's okay with all of you, what I would suggest we do is we take that information, we combine that into some statements, the draft statements that the board would then look at tomorrow. And if there's more discussion that we want to have, or if there is, sort of an agreement that those are good drafts for our mission, vision, and high level metrics, we take that to the board for essentially an approval process to say these are draft. And as we go out and have these discussions that are also part of the organization's goals over the next few months, we begin to bounce those off of the audiences that we're working with. And that will help us, I think, provide a good place for editorial license to get people thinking about it. And then will help us get a little closer to what we might see in that kind of August timeframe as real metrics that we might be able to pull in and the mission and vision. How does that sound for everyone?
Yeah, Dave.
I think it sounds fantastic. As the new guy, I may be missing a lot of foundation materials that everybody else may have. I just have one request of staff. If I could get what we currently use, I know there's a listing of all the criteria that a grant app is held up against: sustainability, the vetting, the background of or how many jobs, so forth, so forth. I think there's, gosh, I don't know, 20 or 30 different things that we hold a grant app up against. If I could get that, I'd appreciate it, because I'm kind of late to the party and I want to refresh my recollection as to what the kind of screen that a grant has to go through before it gets approved. Just a paperwork request of staff is all. Thank you. Otherwise, I think Josh's suggestion was great.
Josh, and I saw you gave a head nod and a thumbs up to Dave. I think even if that's just a high level document of some sort, or even if it's just an email, if we want to shoot that to the whole board just as a primer, or depending on what that looks like and comfort level, but always good to know. And some of us who've been on the board longer than others don't remember that you've only been on a couple months. So, Sarah.
Just tearing off Mr. Kinski's question there. I mean, the Business Council offers a number of different grants or investments, perhaps, and I don't know how different each of those requirements might be between BRC and Kickstart or something else like that. And so I don't know the answer, but I'd ask the Business Council, like, how different are those requirements between grant programs? Because I'm sure they might be slightly different. And I don't want to be too focused on BRC when there's a lot of other programs too that support entrepreneurship or business growth, et cetera.
Good.
So, if I might, yes, every one of those programs has different requirements and different rules. We have the ability to do rules, and we have the ability to make programs up to meet the statutes. So what I would suggest, and this is like, I'm not trying to push anybody off, but we are compiling every program that we currently work on with every piece of information that we could possibly imagine for joint minerals. So if those don't answer your questions, we'll be happy to revisit those questions after that. Those documents have to be to the Legislative Service Office by Thursday at 5. So we will probably do nothing but that between now and then, except a board meeting. But other than that, we're working on all of that. So yes, there are different things going on and different programs. As you mentioned, Kickstart has a completely different set of rules than BRC. But I won't be able to give you all of that information for a little bit, let's just say.
Mr. Chairman and Josh, I asked for BRC just because that's the one that's the biggest and the highest profile. I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I'd just like to see what the criteria is on the BRC, because to me, that's kind of emblematic of our whole process. And downstream of that, I know there's a whole lot of other programs, but just BRC is all I'm looking for. Thanks.
Well, and Dave, that's kind of where, when Josh nodded, I think by the end of the week, that'll definitely be available with the others. So just bear with it. It's not going to be in the next 24, but it should be something that we can have for you shortly to catch that up. Ryan.
So preparatory to tomorrow, when we're going to talk about board composition and duties and how we do our work, and sort of going off of what Dave just mentioned, sort of this, how do we make our decisions, and what does the scorecard look like? I've been torn because we're right. Everybody's right that we're not a corporate board in the sense that we're supposed to make decisions solely through the lens of, return on capital, blah, 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 right? But my question is, if you want business leaders, which is what we say we want on this board, and you're going to hear more of that tomorrow, so get ready. Why do you do that? You're doing it to try to impanel a group of people to make good decisions. And, if our mission is to encourage, stimulate, and support the development and expansion of the economy of the state, how does a normal corporate board of directors discern whether it's accomplishing that mission? And usually the tools to get it done are usually how you decipher whether you're being successful or not, or how you do make that decision. And my frustration from the time that I got here has been, we just judge applications in a one-off basis. We judge the airport in Rock Springs when it comes up, and we just look at it through the sole lens of, do we want to fund that project? But in a normal board, Mr. Chairman, when Devin gets together, the board, they sit down and they say, what are the other potential uses of this capital? What is the highest return we can possibly achieve off this capital, off this investment? We don't get to do that because we're just looking at individual projects. For all I know, the housing project that we just approved for Cheyenne, because I'm a homer, wasn't the right call. Maybe there was 100 other projects that could have been moved forward. But I'm frustrated by the fact that we don't look in one grant cycle to spend a certain amount of money to achieve that mission that Josh posted in our chat. How do we do that? How can we get to the point where we have one grant cycle, y'all come, you put in your grant, and we're going to judge them one against the other to see which ones are the best to accomplish that mission? Because until we do that, we are going to continue to make erratic and arbitrary decisions, in my view.
Yeah, Ryan, I think that's a solid point. I think to that comment around public, governmental, whatever you want to call it, and private, it's also tricky in the fact of, say, you come to a Devon or you come to any other larger company, the board, and say, make these financial decisions. All of those arms of the company are at the table to say, these are the funds we need to succeed. So it isn't based on, and I'll keep using the same example, it isn't based on, well, the Delaware Basin actually put in a budget this year, but North Dakota just didn't feel like they needed to. So even if North Dakota was the better option, if they didn't show up at the table with an application, there's no way to consider it. In a private entity, everyone's forced to the table with, this is your budget, this is what you want, and then you can figure out what to do in the environment. To me, it feels like the Business Council, we can't go force communities to put in applications. We can't go do any of that. So that limits the scope of what we receive. But to your point, Ryan, if we're looking at those things in a single cycle, which is, I believe, what the investments group had tried to do when they were saying BRC grants need to come in and be evaluated at this meeting, this type of grant to be evaluated at this meeting. They were trying to lump them together to evaluate them. I think you're correct there, and there's something in it. But just knowing we're not necessarily going to get all the projects because we can't force anybody to the table is my viewpoint.
But don't we, I mean, I haven't been to any of these grant meetings yet, so I just assume that you sit and you're always looking and saying, well, we only have $23 million for the full biennium. We better hold off. It must not work that way, because I'd be pretty careful. That's number one. Number two, Josh, my first introduction to Josh in a public venue, we'd had the private discussion before, is when he came to JAC and said, I think you folks should be proud not just of what we've said yes to, but what we said no to. We've said no to a lot of water and sewer grants because we're not a water and sewer grant agency. We're trying to keep our powder dry so that when something comes along that genuinely can create a lot of good looking jobs, that we'll have the resources to do it. So I had assumed that there'd been a change in the process somewhere, but what I'm hearing from you, Ryan, is not. It's whatever's on in front of us that, okay, gotcha. Okay. Well, that probably needs further development then. Good point.
Yeah, so I think we had Mark, Jason, Randy.
I agree with what Ryan said, and I think that there's a lot there because I think that we should also have the decision, and if your economic development strategy lines up with Wyoming's economic development strategy, then that should give you more points. The other thing is that if we go to more of this regional model that you guys are talking about, my hope is that we will have more of that information. I don't know how it's going to actually flesh out, but if those kind of things are happening, there should be some of that knowledge that as a board we could identify and use.
I think the thing that I would add, in an ideal world, I agree with Ryan. It'd be awesome if we could have all those grants come in at once. We could evaluate them collectively, make a decision by what's going to be the best ROI or whatever. I would also say, unfortunately, in the world of business, I don't know how realistic that is. We have to be willing to look at whatever is in front of us. And there may be something that comes to fruition at an off grant awardee period that really is the best of the options at that point. From a private industry perspective, then, if you're out of capital, you go look for lending agencies or something to give you additional capital to capitalize on that. In our world, we can't do that because we have a finite amount of dollars that we are able to do that. So maybe one of the things I would suggest is I think we could run a grant cycle, maybe annually, Ryan, that uses a predefined portion of our budget, so that we can compare as many of those opportunities as possible collectively. To Derek's comment, if they don't show up, they don't show up. They just, they don't get the award. But then I also think we should, for those grants maybe that are off cycle with remaining budget dollars or whatever, I do think we should start creating or be seeing something from staff as far as a metric scorecard, kind of to what some of Mark was suggesting, as in how does this measure up to either our overall economic plan for the state, our desires, maybe an industry specifically that we're pursuing, and help maybe give us some insight into, if we were to line everyone up equally, how does this one fit the bill in an off-cycle perspective based on some type of metric or scorecard that we're weighing it against?
So thanks for that. I guess my thoughts, Ryan, I struggle a little bit with a one-time application and disbursement. Part of the goal I think that we have is to operate at the speed of business. And in my mind, that also means that we are being flexible, and because you can't time opportunities when they show up. From the bank side, I can't ask everybody to apply for a loan at the same time, and then I pick my favorite ones. And then, so it works in that they come in all the time. We still make good loans. We still make money. There are some ones that end up bad, but to be fair, every loan we make is good at the beginning, right? And that's the same here. So I guess I would hate to pigeonhole us too much in limiting the time frame, just because these things come up, and I think we should be flexible. I do like the idea though of a standard scorecard that we look at for each program so that we can kind of get an idea of where it ranks, which would tie to what our goals are, what our outcomes should, what we want them to be. And then we can absolutely pick and choose that way. Maybe if they score over percent, then they have a much better shot of getting approved or something. I don't know, something like that. But I would encourage us to be careful and make sure that we're keeping in mind we want to operate at the speed of business.
So, Brandy, thank you, because that was one of the main points I had was that we've gotten a lot of pushback around we need to be quicker, we need to be at the speed of business. And if we say we've got to put everything against each other in a calendar year, that effectively does the exact opposite and slows things down. The other thing, there's a lot of evaluation that's done within our staff of these projects. And frankly, if a project doesn't make sense, it doesn't come to us in the first place. So I want us to be cognizant of that, of the work that Bert and his group does in investments to make sure that these things cash flow, that they make sense. Because we've seen those, we've seen evidence of it, especially, and I hate to say this, some of you guys who are newer on the board, you haven't seen this yet, so you're asking a lot of questions based on your knowledge, and I understand that. We've seen a number of projects come to us that don't either cash flow or show a community benefit that's something that we support as part of our goals, and we haven't funded them. Now SLIB has made their own decisions, and that's SLIB's decision. I understand and agree with some of these comments around a scorecard or how do we level set it against what our goals and priorities are. I'm kind of excited to hear that because that's one thing that we've been asked for. The investments committee has been asked for, rather, by Bert and his group, is an outline and a set of priorities on how to best evaluate their projects and what we as the board want to see them push through in terms of projects. So, I think that's something we can align to, and that work's being done, which is great. But that's also at least acknowledge a little bit that, the folks who are making the financial decisions are pretty darn skilled at their job. And we need to acknowledge that a little bit too. Dave and Mark.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one option is that we have sort of a minimum hurdle rate that we've got to see this kind of return in terms of the jobs, the ROI, before we're going to really move forward. And at the same time, maybe staff goes back through and they rake through the grants that have really been the winners, and they identify those characteristics and what the return was there. And because I'm with Ryan, if we dissipate our funds on just whatever happens to be in front of us at the moment, and that does run against, I'm just going to tell you about experience I had. We had a winner. I mean, we had a winner, and we lost it to another state that just made their decisions so much faster than us. And I know it was between quarterly grant cycles, but it just the numbers were there, the due diligence was there, the vetting was there, and we just couldn't make it happen. I don't know what the answer is, but I can see that we just got to have some sort of minimum hurdle rate, or maybe benchmarking against the best of the best, Mr. Chairman. There's got to be an answer.
No, Dave, I think that's a good approach. And my understanding is that there is a certain amount of internal hurdle rating that goes on within our investments group to make sure it makes sense. So great. Let's find a way that we can publish that at least to our board and have that conversation. We do have more of those conversations in the investments meeting than we do in the overall public meeting. So that's probably part of this too, is the awareness around that. There's a good solution here, Mark and Ryan, because you both said it today. Dave, your comment about how do we not lose things on a timing cycle? Quit waiting on the SLIB meetings to approve it. Because you know what? This board has proven that if we need a special meeting, we'll call one in 24 hours and get shit done. Sorry, stuff done. Um,
And I would add, Mr. Chairman, I think that you can accomplish both because I think that some of the grants that we're doing, like I think if it's a speculative business park that's supported by a good business case, I think those are the kind of things that you put in the ground and it takes 5 years before it matriculates and turns into something. And I think those are the kind of things we could evaluate once a year and lay them all on the table and decide best return on investment. I think there could be a separate pot of money that is what used to be like business committed. That's like business is ready to go. This many jobs, it checks this metric set, and those you could advance quickly. But the ones that there's a lot of Wyoming that needs just basic economic development infrastructure. And I mean like just the basics of community development. And those ones I think you could set all of those down and look at them. And I don't think you would affect business speed on those either if you add another pot of money that you could go to that was the 30-day turn or the 60-day turn. So
and that's a great point, thinking about what are all our different programs, right? And that we have to approach them all differently. What a timing turnaround looks like on a community planning grant is potentially very different than a BRC, or I mean, we've seen it with Kickstart, we've seen it with also with our loan programs, our 50/50 and our succession loans. You guys have all been kind enough with your time to be able to jump on to special meetings to approve those so a banker can get it done. So, a small business owner can take over a business. So you're right. It requires that flexibility that we've been offering, but how do we continue to offer it, but also be able to compare and contrast between those opportunities? Great discussion on this one. I think this is super important to talk to and understand, because these are all things we're hearing on the outside of what's our speed that we're moving. We've honestly hold and I think we've all heard this, or not all, but maybe multiple, probably all. But you have all that money, why haven't you spent all of it yet? So kind of that discussion around, do we pick the best investment for the money, or do we just follow a traditional model to spend all the funds? And I think we all agree we need to spend it, or at least what I've heard, we need to spend it where it can be best utilized. Beth, I see you, and I've been thinking about what are your thoughts from the kind of your perspective, your CEO role in terms of a nonprofit kind of governmental agency perspective on this conversation.
I keep thinking that I bet the staff group chat is kind of blowing up over some of the things that we're talking about. And I think that we need to trust the staff of the Business Council in some regard. And I think there are things that they use to evaluate, given their expertise, that certainly there could be more in terms of how they want to approach a scorecard. But I do think that the point that we need multiple grant cycles is an important one, just from a staff perspective, a staff capacity perspective. I just can't imagine the staff being able to weigh in only a couple times a year or what have you, and be able to evaluate all of the requests that come in. So I'm just thinking about the staff and how we get all of this done with the great staff that we have.
Agreed. I mean, we've got one heck of a staff. We need to remember and empower them to do their job the best they can, right? They're the ones who are talking to these communities and meeting with everybody. Courtney, my multitasking skills aren't doing so hot at the moment. Can you add Jason back in? I think he just got dropped. With that, I guess any other thoughts, any more thoughts? Josh, how would you like to weigh in too? I mean, we're getting close to wrapping up time, I think. I'm never afraid to go over if it's good conversation, but I also know we've got a full day of this again tomorrow too. Okay, I see Jason and Melissa, so I think I'm going to put you on hold for a second, Josh. Jason, now that we got you back in, thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate all the great comments. I apologize I dropped out. I did not want to, when I was talking about metrics for approval of grants, things like that, I did not want to diminish the work that our staff does by any means. I think they do a fantastic job. But where I was going was with some of the comments that we've made earlier, especially that with maybe one that Randy made, which is ownership. If we're going to own this, I would love to have some data that supports the decision that we made. And that data should come from staff because they are the experts in that, you know. And so when we think about some type of scoring metric or something like that, that's where my mind's at is if we have that data set or that metrics card, when we get questioned in the future as to winners and losers, which we've heard coined multiple times, or we get questioned on why we made this or why we made that, we have the documentation that supports the decision that we all made, not just, hey, we were confronted with it and yeah, it kind of felt good at the time or anything like that. So please don't take my probing about a metrics type evaluation a shot at staff. I know the staff are doing their work. I know they do a fantastic job. I know they're experts in their field. I think it would just be great to have something documented to support those decisions as we look at funds being dispersed annually.
Yeah, Melissa.
I agree with Jason. I think our staff does a good job, and I think that's why they've been hired to work for the Wyoming Business Council and to go through and make some of these decisions before these presentations are ever made to the board. Derek, I have some questions. There have been some comments about people on the board being qualified or not to sit on the board. I don't want to be blindsided tomorrow by anything that might happen. I feel like we were all appointed to this board by the governor for a reason and for various reasons because of our diversity. So I just wonder if you can lend some information on that.
Well, so I will tell you, kind of in hearing from the report, the preliminary, not even a preliminary report from the group, just that they met and had some thoughts they wanted to bring forth. The idea is we'll just they'll bring forth part of those ideas tomorrow. I don't think there's, Ryan, please fill in the gaps for me here. Any sort of finalized report or report out, which is what we'd asked for, but they had until the end of June. So really my plan is to just ask Ryan for an update on where they're at. Nothing out of that will be anything that's a blind side. Everyone will be firmly aware of what's going on. And the reality is, Melissa, anything that's tied to our board composition or structure outside of internal expectations still has to go through a legislative review and adoption as statute. So no material change can occur without that change, without that legislative change. Sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue here this evening. But definitely want to talk through this with everybody. And so nothing that can happen is a change. Ryan, can you fill in any gaps I'm missing, or I catch it fairly well?
No, you did, Derek. So Melissa, during a recent conversation with one of the members of the Minerals Committee and potential future president of the state Senate, she raised the idea that we should look at board composition very generally. It's not tied to individual members. It's tied to how many people should sit on the board. Should there be regional representation, or should it be at large across the state? Should we look at legislators being ex officio or actual board members? Should the governor continue to serve as the co-chair? Do we have a recommendation with regard to SLIB approval of grants that come through us? Right now, as you'll see tomorrow, it's very 30,000 foot. These are the sorts of things that we see as important to constitute an effective board. And there aren't names attached to it. It's strictly numerics and how we'd like to do our work going forward, including paring down our committee structure down to, I think, 2 standing committees in addition to the executive committee. So it's mostly blocking and tackling at this point. And then we'll deal with, the question of who sits in those seats on a going forward basis. But none of that is up for discussion tomorrow.
Thanks, Ryan. See, I knew you could put it better than I could because you were the one doing the work. So,
And can you
so
just tell
that's
me where on the agenda is that? I've been trying to find that.
Dave, since that will be handled as just kind of a discussion update, that's something we're just going to roll in underneath my closing remarks.
Gotcha.
It isn't an actionable item. It isn't
Okay.
even really a formal report. Like I expect to hear
Gotcha.
basically what Ryan just said, and that be the end of it since we don't have an actual deliverable or any actual recommendations to discuss at this time. And if need be, when we have those recommendations, we'll either put it into the next meeting or we'll have a special meeting to have that greater discussion. Melissa, I hope that helped.
Yeah, I would just hate to think that we were going to revise the board to promote groupthink, to eliminate diversity, and to perhaps achieve some of the goals with certain consequences that we're not achieving from a diverse board, just to achieve a certain outcome. I guess that's all. That's all I want to
Well,
say. So yeah,
I can
lots
assure
of
you
food for thought.
I can assure you we are a board of 13 and we will act as a board of 13 until such time someone else tells us we're not a board of 13. How's that?
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Ryan, too. I appreciate you guys.
You're going to be starkly disappointed because we're going to keep it a board of 13 going forward. But anyway, we'll talk about how that all looks going forward tomorrow, or how we suggest it.
Awesome. Thank you both. Mr. Durrell.
Mr. Co-Chair, maybe we could kind of close this out a little bit. Where we started was thinking about our personal connection to this board, our skills, the way they might relate to this board, our passion for Wyoming. And we also did a really good job of talking a lot about the vision that we see and some potential metrics. And then the mission, like what is the Wyoming Business Council's role? And I kind of I obviously can't watch this back in real time, but as I was watching this, I noticed that we did a really good job of all of those elements, and the practicalities of our job get in the way. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that is how this is going to work. We have the ability, and we showed it, to really think at a high level, to think of what the future could look like, to point the compass to the future and say, this is where we need to go. And we also have the practicalities of the day ahead of us, which is tomorrow, where we'll be making decisions about these. And there are a bunch of silly business metaphors for this, like building the plane as you fly it. That is how everything works. You rarely get to stop for a year and retool and then start again. It's just not how it works. And what I want everyone here to remember is that we don't have a set of program rules that is so rigid because the problem is so known that we can have those rigid rules. We are working on a problem that is complex. That is, if that's not clear from today's discussion, you are going to need to rewatch this, but I'm guessing it's clear to everybody. We are working on a problem that is not just complex, but it's also volatile. It changes by the day. And so we will continue to make decisions that get us a little closer, that get us a little closer, that get us a little closer. And it will be frustrating for communities, for businesses, for everybody who want absolute certainty in everything they do, because that doesn't exist. And it definitely doesn't exist when you have a problem that's as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous as the Wyoming economy is. And the tools that we have are the tools that we have today. And what I want to encourage this board to continue to do is work between those two levels and realize that the level that we were up here thinking about the big picture and what it would look like if we were to solve this problem and what direction we would need to go to do that is not something we do and we create, we put it in a document and set it on a shelf. No, it's what we create in our mind so that as we make the decisions we make tomorrow, we can make them and point things slightly in that direction and keep moving because the world is going to change around us. The decisions we make today, we will look back, or the decisions we make tomorrow, we will look back and sort of go, gosh, those were the decisions we made? And the answer is yes. As Mr. Kinski said, the first time I sat in front of JAC, we talked about all of the times we said no. The reason we did that is because we had never said no before 2020. Saying no is not what humans like. They do not like to hear it. They also don't like change. And that is what this entity was created to do for the Wyoming economy, not to the Wyoming economy, for the Wyoming economy. And so the discussion that we had today at a high level, we've got to keep in mind. We're going to draft some vision, mission, metric statements. That's a big piece of it. But every time we get down into the weeds and we make decisions, we need to be thinking about both of those levels. If you want to know what makes a good board member, they have to be hungry, humble, and smart, ideal team players. They also need to be able to operate on multiple levels so that we can make sure that we are acting as the board. And I say we, you are acting as the board and making policy and investment decisions in line with that. Also, making policy and investment decisions that create change in Wyoming's economy. Because we're not here to rinse and repeat. We're not here to run a program that looks the same as it did in 2020, and none of our programs do. But we are here to bring change, and we're here to bring change for businesses so that there are great jobs, so that people can and do want, not have to, want and can be in Wyoming. And I heard that loud and clear. And I think our team and our board are more aligned after today's discussion than I've ever heard. That level of this is our purpose. We are here to do things that make people uncomfortable is unfortunate because it creates stress. But stress is how change is made. What we are doing today and what we will do tomorrow is we will work on creating discomfort for our economy because discomfort is where we have to be. We were built this way. We've been tasked to make change. And if we don't do that, we shouldn't. And I think everything that we're saying today, a little bit of angst, a little bit of frustration, a little bit of excitement, a little bit of action, a lot of passion, that's why we're here. It's not to acquiesce to what some folks in the legislature want us to not or be. That's not our job. Our job is to think about the future, create the change that is required, and be bold enough and strong enough to stand behind that. And what I will tell you is that I believe that this board is the right one to do that. And I hope you watch some of this back. I hope you think about the things that have been said here today, because I think it's a big deal. Today is an inflection point, a positive inflection point for the Business Council. And tomorrow we will begin acting on that. And it won't stop. The rate at which we change is going to be uncomfortable for everyone. So that's our job. So thanks for everybody's input today. I loved it. We did not make it as far as we needed to, but that's okay. We will meet again. Likely, not just on a regularly quarterly scheduled cadence, because we will likely have other projects come up. We will likely have agreements we all need to sign so that we can, or approve, so that we can continue on after July 1st. And that is part of the deal. So we will meet again and we will have these discussions again. And I just appreciate you being able to operate on multiple levels. It's not easy and you do it well. So thanks for the discussion today. It was awesome to listen to it.
Absolutely. I speaking for the board, appreciate your efforts in putting it together and presenting this kind of robust, deep conversation. I know we didn't hit everything we wanted to, but I think it was well worth the time. I'd also like to thank all of you board members for your quick flexibility on moving to a virtual session. It stinks to have to do it in May. It stinks to have to do it at all. Frankly, I can't stand staring at the computer screen and would much rather be sitting around a table with all of you. But I just looked at the road cameras and it's still a standstill through Wamsutter. So some of you would still be sitting on I-80 if we had chosen to do it in person. So thank you all so much for your time.
Mr. Chairman, I want to state to you publicly what I've stated to you privately. I think you do a hell of a job chairing a committee. There's some strong wills here and strong opinions, and I think you do a very good job chairing the committee, and thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that, Dave. Speaking of strong opinions, everybody go have a good evening of relaxing the strong opinions, and we will see everybody back at 8 a.m. ready to go tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you all. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
See
you.
you